running to Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Happy to join you once again. Ghost and I have a few interesting items to go through. Ghost, how you doing today?
Man, I'm great. Just sitting here watching the primal scream of a dying regime echo throughout the world. It is incredible to watch, and it invigorates me. The louder they scream and the more I get to watch them cry, literally cry in many cases, the more fulfilling it is, and just the more it like fuels me to keep going. So it's wonderful, man. It's a great cycle to be in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, there's definitely a lot of very, very good reasons for optimism right now, and to just take some joy. And I think based on that, like Schadenfreude feeling that you've just illustrated, I think a really great little video that I noticed you posted this morning that was very satisfying for me to watch was the I'll just play it right here. This is the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, a European rules-based order true believer, having a complete breakdown faced with the fact that his religious ideology of Euro-liberalism is no longer compatible with reality. And let's just have a look.
After the speech of Vice President Vance on Friday, we have to fear that our common value base is not that common anymore. I'm very grateful to all those European politicians that spoke out and reaffirmed the values and principles that they are defending. No one did this better than President Zelensky. Let me conclude, and this becomes difficult.
No, I just thought that was such an embodiment of the times that we're living in, and it sort of like touched on the essence. Now, we have obviously some pretty fun ruptures, a lot of breaks with delusions at the Munich Security Conference, both in the wake of J.D. Vance's speech, which I enjoyed. That was already quite a few days ago. And also, I think more recently now, the bilateral decision to just enforce common sense onto an insane situation on the Ukraine front, and probably other, hot spots around the world based upon the Russian-U.S. delegations meeting in Saudi Arabia. And I'm thinking we're going to have to talk about that a little bit today too. And there's conniption fits and freakouts amongst the Eurocrats. So let's do that. But before we do that, let's hear a word from today's sponsor. So Goldco is the primary sponsor today. So let's have a listen, and I'll just bring up the script here. Goldco. Are you ready for the golden age? With recent headlines buzzing about Fort Knox, it's time to shine a light on gold. We've seen questions like, is there really gold in Fort Knox? Is the government secretly moving it? But the real question is, are we going back to the gold standard? In a world where economic stability is uncertain, gold remains the timeless asset. Fort Knox, the fortress of America's gold reserves, is under scrutiny, and this might be the moment gold proves its worth once again. Don't miss out on securing your financial future. Gold isn't just an investment, it's a safeguard against inflation, currency devaluation, and economic turmoil. Whether it's for your retirement, a family heirloom, or just to have peace of mind, now is the time to invest in gold. Are we going back to the gold standard? Only time will tell. Don't miss a golden opportunity to find out. Secure your wealth now. Visit badlandsgold.com to learn how you can add gold to your portfolio with whispers of returning to gold standard. Your future could be as bright as gold itself. That's badlandsgold.com. So, oh, wait, I just lost it. There we are. Okay. So,
yes. So, I mean, Yesterday, I went on. I did my weekly segment on Badlands Daily with CanCon, which is a longer format news program. You know, we went like over 2 hours. And then after that, I went on John Harold's the Daily Herald show, which is like a super condensed format. So he had me on for like 10 minutes.
Okay.
And it's interesting when I go on that program because he always tells me to be very short and sweet, which is against my nature. But as he was so we were talking about similar news stories that I discussed with Brian. But as he was teeing up the articles he wanted to talk about, it kind of like dawned on me in that moment, and I was able to articulate it to him. But for the past century, the affairs of the Middle East have been, because we were talking about how Europe and Ukraine have been boxed out of this negotiation happening in Riad between the Russians and the Americans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all freaking out about it. They're screaming about it, just absolutely upset. And it's funny, like for the past century, the affairs of the Middle East have been managed by Europe. I mean, after the British convinced the Arabs to help them defeat the Ottomans in World War I, they promised in exchange to give them their sovereignty and give them, you know, their nation state and allow them to engage in self-governance, and of course stab them in the back and said, nope, we're going to do imperialism instead. Puppet regimes, like that kind of stuff. Now all of a sudden, Europe, you know, pursuing this ridiculous woke, just Malthusian death cult syndrome that they've been going after for so long. They've weakened themselves to the point that they have zero power projection. They don't have military might. They don't have economic might. They are energy dependent on places like Russia and the Middle East. I mean, they are literally at the weakest they've been probably in thousands of years, I would imagine. And now all of a sudden, the affairs of Europe are being managed by the Middle East, among others. And it's just this wonderful inversion. And I have no hate for Europe. I mean, I love like classic European culture. I just recognize that a parasite has positioned itself at the top of European social hierarchy and has been there for many centuries and has been sucking the life force out of Europe for centuries. And that's part of the reason America was founded in the first place, was to get away from that. And now all of a sudden we're seeing that parasite isolated, boxed out, exposed, and hopefully destroyed, I think, finally. The same battle we've been fighting for the past 250 years.
Yeah, no, I had a drink with my my old high school buddy who's been living in Sweden for a while. He recently is just visiting Canada, so we had a drink and discussed things a little bit. And we were talking about, you know, he's concerned they're based on the economic and social fabric breakdown within Sweden. There's a lot of drug gangs from the Middle East, a lot of violence that's sparked up. He sees a dysfunctionality in the broader system of government as a whole. He's admitting that there's energy suicide and that it's not clear who's even making decisions. But at the same time, he was unable to resolve the fact that the propaganda is kind of working on him, where he was like of the view, but we need to defend ourselves against Russia. And he was telling me like, well, why can't we just, he was actually starting to eat up this idea that why can't we just have a more centralized federal Europe that could collectively tax all of the member states, that could use that towards creating an actual European military, after admitting that the entire system is run by incompetent people who are who you don't even know who's making decisions. And you're going to allow this incompetent, destructive thing to have that level of centralized control because you're afraid of Russia wanting to take Ukraine? Like it makes like very, very little sense. And I was thinking about the idea that is being floated right now, and it seems like there are certain people that want this, who are very nefarious, bad. They want to use the crisis to try to do what my friend was telling me. And you have people like Mario Draghi, a vicious Goldman Sachs, Mark Carney, eco banker who was Italian. I mean, he ran Italy for a while, and he's been pushing for this idea of retooling the economy of Europe to create a European army, along with Macron saying something similar. But then it's like, if the type of people who you have as the technocratic top management positions are breaking down in tears because of words, I mean, not only are you never going to be able to manage to build that, but even if you had that, it wouldn't be run in any competent manner anyway. So you have to completely, like you said, look to the deeper, forgotten classical traditions of Europe that made Europe good, and then maybe do some soul searching and think about a multi-generational healing process to get over what we've done to our society after they ousted de Gaulle, who was probably the last like real mensch who had any type of political clout in Europe. And they ousted him, and went the other way. So it's the same thing for, every country has to sort of do that. And Europe's so far behind on that racetrack. It's crazy. But overall, what do you think about the, I mean, I guess you did talk about that in the previous shows. So what's your assessment so far for our audience who may not have seen your take on the outcome of what was agreed upon, what's hoped to be agreed upon coming out of the Saudi meeting between Lavrov and his American colleagues? What's your take on it?
I'm so excited about, like, I'm so just optimism, pure optimism. It's everything that I would really would want to see happen. Not that I anticipated the exact path this was going to go, but as I'm watching it unfold, I'm like, yes. I mean, obviously there was some trepidation when Trump came out and said the thing that he said about owning Gaza. But I still, as I said when I came on the show the next day, I maintained that there was something else afoot. Like, that wasn't what Trump really wanted to happen. He was playing a game. He was using narrative warfare to achieve a different outcome than what he was conveying into the camera. And we now have seen that completely come full swing. And what happened was, of course, as I said last week, is he, I believe I said it last week. The days are all blending together. But he asked the Arabs to come together and to come up with their own counter proposal. And that's what we're now seeing happen, is the Arabs have come together. That has aligned perfectly with this Riad meeting, which Trump said like last Thursday or Friday, oh, this isn't going to happen for a while. Like, this Riad thing it's going to be a while out. Like, I even said that. I was like, yeah, it might be a while. Like, who knows? They may let things play out a little bit. Nope. It was like 2 days later on Sunday, Marco Rubio was on a plane flying to the Middle East. Lavrov suddenly got on a plane on Monday, flew to the Middle East, and it's happening, man. And so at the same time, just so everyone understands, at the same time, we have in Riyadh, we have the Ukraine war being peace proposal or peace negotiation occurring. This is all narrative. I mean, I understand people believe, and I to an extent believe this has all been worked out maybe before, but we're seeing the story now play out in the public narrative. We're seeing the Ukraine be resolved. We're seeing Gaza be resolved, like Israel be resolved. That's probably going to be a longer process. And we're also seeing the Iran nuclear situation, like the Iran-Israel situation, be resolved. Because, ever since Trump entered office, even the weeks leading up, the storyline has been, the narrative has been that we're going to go to war with Iran. Like, Israel's going to go to war with Iran. Trump is a Zionist puppet, right? That's what like everyone's saying.
Yeah. He's calling for bombing Iranian nuclear sites, or no, not. Was it even nuclear, or was it just energy in general? I think it was nuclear. He said it was his like his proxies, like his people were kind of calling for that. But then Trump put out the Truth Social post where he said all of the rhetoric about bombing Iran is completely exaggerated. We're not going to go to war with Iran. It is. Don't know if you saw that. If you saw that post where he said, I want Iran to be a great country. I want them to be super successful. I want to help them achieve that. We're not going to go to war with them. We're not going to bomb them. Sorry. That was February 5th, I believe, if I remember correctly. So yeah, he said, sorry that this isn't going to happen. And then Saudi, of course, stands up and offers to broker this peace. I personally think that the Iran nuclear deal 1.0 was not about nuclear weapons. I think it was about money laundering. I think it was about sending money to them, and that money being laundered through the central bank, and that money basically like bad actors in Iran and other places, including the U.S., laundering and stealing a ton of money, hundreds of billions of dollars, under the auspice of, a nuclear deterrent program or whatever. And I think Trump probably understood that to a certain extent, which is why he opposed the Iran nuclear deal, and why a lot of people did, because it just didn't make any sense. Why are we sending them pallets of cash,
in various denominations in secret overnight and not telling anyone. And then it only comes out because of a whistleblower. I mean, it very much was parallel to Netanyahu walking briefcases full of cash into Gaza to keep Hamas propped up after Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, sanctioned them and cut off their funding and said, all right, now that you tried to kill our prime minister, the Palestinian prime minister, we're going to basically bankrupt you. This is 2018. And, good luck. Like, the people in Gaza can eat you alive. That's fine. And then, of course, Netanyahu said, here's our opportunity to keep our militant adversaries propped up because we want to go to war with these people, of course. And we've seen how that's played out. So, this is what this all comes back down to. And, to your friend's point, to address your friend's concern, this is about two different factions. The faction that wants death, war, chaos, and destabilized societies, which would then, Hegelian dialectic, warrant a centralized command control structure, a centralized government to fix all these problems for us, right? Yeah. Versus people who want peace, stability, prosperity, the golden age, multipolarity, the sovereign alliance, all of that stuff, like individual freedom, individual prosperity. Those are the two sides. All right. And we all know where the Satanists and the death cult people and the occult and all those people, the child traffickers, we know which side they fall on, right? We're starting to learn which side other people who may or may not be into that stuff are falling on, but it's very easy to identify them now. They self-identify now. The people, I mean, Nancy Mace, I've been posting about her. I've just been kind of like reposting her stuff for the past 24 hours. I mean, she is like bloodthirsty, like, let's go kill these people, and acting like it is some sort of Christian virtue. And nothing disgusts me more than when Christians virtue signal about, their Christian whatever. And I was raised a Christian. I am a Christian. But when people act like they wear that as like a shield, and they say, I am a good Christian because I want to go kill these people, take their land from them, complete defiance of everything that is written in the Bible and everything that Jesus taught. And then give this land to other people. It doesn't matter who the people are. It doesn't matter if you're killing Jews and giving it to Muslims, or killing Muslims or giving it to Jews. And the reality is, of course, is that a lot of these tribes in Palestine are Christian. They're direct descendants of the people who were in the Bible. The Samaritans, the people who interacted with Jesus, their direct descendants are people in the West Bank right now. Many of them are Christian, and they're the people who are being killed. They're the people who are having their homes taken from them. They're the people who are being subjugated by Bibi Netanyahu and his friends. And of course, there's no concern for them. There's no tears for them. I'm not even sure if Christians in America know that. Like a lot of people are just in the dark about that fact. And that just goes back to the propaganda and the lies that were told by our government.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's part of the what makes Christianity so beautiful is the emphasis upon humility, loving God, loving your fellow man, and learning how to love yourself from that standpoint, forgiving those who have trespassed against us, loving even your enemies. Like, that's quite the challenge. And you have to be you could do it from a stupid reason. If you're just a low level dupe, like idiot, you could just not think it through. But to do it for the right reasons requires a deep level of maturity, emotional, intellectual maturity, to not strike like an animal when you've been attacked. That requires something very, very powerful. So to see that level of arrogance and quickness to judge others to the point that you're willing to carry out vast injustice to other human beings, whether or not they're even in many cases, they're from the Christian world. There's many Christians, as you've said, who have been living in Palestine in an unbroken continuity since the days of Christ. And they're being destroyed. Churches were annihilated. Families were wiped out, Muslim and Christian alike, of people who have been living multi-generationally in that zone. So
yeah. I mean, it should be noted that in the past year and a half, the oldest church in the world, a church that was built in the 600s, was bombed in Gaza and destroyed. It was the oldest church in the world, and it was bombed with Christians inside of it, and many of them died. And that wasn't even reported in the Western world. Like Eastern media reported that, but you had to go to like obscure sources to even find that. There are videos of the people huddling in the church while the windows were shaking and the dust was falling from the ceiling and the place was being bombed. And it's just it's incredible to me to see like these fake Christians in Congress get up and pontificate about their bloodlust when that's happening, right? I mean, that's the net result of what we're watching. And so it's disgusting. It's really regrettable. I think that future generations are going to look back and feel like we are going to feel deep shame and regret over what we have stood by and allowed to happen. A lot of it unwittingly, of course, but it is what it is. One thing I would say that I wanted to say before, there's a great conversation that occurred on Sunday night. There's a show on Badlands called The Narrative by Burning Bright, who's the editor of our Substack, and he had General Stephen Quast on, and they had a really, really thoughtful, great conversation about all of this, about ushering in this era of peace. And the general, like, if you want to have reinvigorate your soul for this fight, a conversation with General Quast about geopolitics always does that for me, just because he has such insightful wisdom when it comes to that. So I encourage anyone who's watching this who hasn't seen that, go watch that and listen to that, and it will be very, very soothing, I think, for you to hear, because he addresses a lot of this stuff. He addresses the fact that President Trump is using narrative warfare, and he's using what appears to be bombastic rhetoric, which is kind of what I've been saying the past few weeks. This bombastic rhetoric to bring issues to the front, to bring issues to the surface, these questions that people need to be asking about what is actually happening here, questions that people have probably been thinking for a while, but maybe afraid to ask, or uncertain whether that's the actual thing that is occurring. And they're afraid of being accused of certain things, like being called an anti-Semite, for suggesting that maybe Israel, or maybe Netanyahu, this regime in Israel, desires the land in Gaza. And that's the whole purpose of this war, which is a lot of people have been saying, but it's hard to know if that's really what they mean, or really what they're after. And so it's really encouraging to see that Trump has brought this issue to the forefront. It's now basically been taken out of the hands of Netanyahu and then passed off to the Arabs. The Arabs are now deciding what is going on there. But I do think that we're probably going to that situation, I think, is going to take a little longer to play out. I think there's going to be more of a public negotiation that occurs, I suspect, with just the whole Israel situation in general. Yeah. So, but the Ukraine thing I see being resolved much quicker.
Yeah, for sure. I do too. I think that they're two very challenging knots to untangle, and the less challenging of the two is clearly the Ukraine front. Though you do have a lot of parallels, as you and I have discussed, as far as the idea of a chosen special race that has been groomed by intelligence agencies for multiple generations. In the case of Ukraine, obviously you're dealing with this romanticization of some glorious Kievan past, which has some weird Nordic, some Nordic obsession, just like the Nazi SS sort of inner elite had a Nordic obsession with themselves as the Hyperborean, superhuman, Aryan, Teutonic, perfect bloodlines that are ordained by some force on high to enslave and command the destiny of the rest of the Untermenschen species of the earth, or races of the earth. So you have certain racist neo-Nazi organizations that have been groomed in the case of Ukraine. They believe in a weird blood and soil cult, which is probably also why there's a weird affinity among certain fanatical Zionist groupings that don't seem to have an issue working with these Nazi groups of Ukraine. Yeah. And we've noted already in past shows multiple points of connection, both in terms of training IDF forces, working economically through various organized crime networks tied to the thing that put Poroshenko and Zelensky into power, that has weird overlaps into Israel. So we know that there's this weird blood and soil cultish Ubermenschen ideology that has been groomed by Anglo-American intelligence for a long time that are problematic, but less problematic than Israel is the case of Ukraine. And definitely, I was very enlivened when I saw I listened to the speech, and there were a couple of excerpts that I thought I would just play 1 minute each by Trump, commenting on the crying of Zelensky and the complaining and whining of Zelensky, who's not allowed to take part, although he tried to force himself. He invited himself to Saudi Arabia, though he had no role to play in any of this stuff. And he's even said he will not respect any decisions made between the USA and Russia, as if he has a choice in the matter. And I like what Trump said. So I was going to just play.
Yeah, go ahead and play it.
Let's do it.
It's a good clip to play.
So the first one here, let's do first 1 minute clip.
Do you have any message for Ukrainians who, after 3 years of fighting, might feel betrayed or disappointed at not having a seat at these initial talks in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think I'm really disappointed in what's happened. I've been watching this for 3 years. It's a war that would have never happened if I was president, and I've been watching these people being killed at levels that you've rarely seen, not even close, since the Second World War. And I'm very disappointed. I hear that, they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago without the loss of much land, very little land, without the loss of any lives, and without the loss of cities that are just laying on their sides. You have those magnificent golden domes that are shattered, will never be replaced. You can't replace them. 1,000-year-old domes that are so beautiful, you can't replace that. A whole civilization has changed because of what. So when they're worried about not being seated, you mean somebody that should have gone in and made a deal a long time ago.
What are your thoughts?
I love the way that Trump is able to kind of like cut through all the nonsense and really speak to the heart of stuff, because these reporters just ask, number one, the worst questions. They also they always frame their question in a very gotcha way. Like they're trying to, no matter like any other, like a less skilled politician, I want to say, or a less skilled statesman, would definitely get tripped up. And even if they conveyed the same message that Trump just said, they would say it in such a way that the media could spin it to make him seem like the bad guy, no matter what you say, right? And so the Ukrainians feel betrayed. And then Trump's like, betrayed? It's like, why haven't you people negotiated a resolved? It's been 3 years. You could have resolved this 3 years ago. Like, why haven't you resolved it? It's not our fault that you haven't resolved it. I know you have other clips, so I'll save my other thoughts for things that I know Trump said in his speech here. But
absolutely, yeah, no, and just to back up that point too, it wasn't just people who are criticizing Trump and Putin for allowing for this agreement or this negotiation process to begin without having European or Ukrainian representation taking part. Well, like Trump said, you've had many years. It was more than 3 years. You didn't do anything. And in fact, when you did do something called Minsk I in 2014 and Minsk II in 2015, which did provide the foundations for an authentic recovery and peace process, it was admitted by Zelensky in an interview, by Francois Hollande, who was then the president of France, and Merkel, who all took part. They all three admitted separately that these were designed to fail and simply buy Ukraine more time to militarize in preparation for a conflict kinetically with Russia. So that was already admitted. They're not. That means that they're not capable of negotiating in an honest, authentic manner. They've proven themselves incapable. So, let's now get something done.
Not to mention that in May of 2022, we know for a fact that Putin and Zelensky signed. I guess it would have been, was it Minsk III? Maybe it was a peace treaty or a ceasefire that, the Russian military basically had Kiev surrounded, or at least in the north, they were coming in from the north. And then Zelensky signed the deal. The Russians pull back. And then Boris Johnson, with his crazy hair, jumps on a plane, flies to Kiev, and basically twist Zelensky's arm to make him violate that ceasefire, while the Western media is sitting there saying, look, the Russians are pulling back, the Ukrainians are winning, go Ukraine, we got to fight. Like, these people are the worst people who've ever lived. I will continue to say that. The most evil people who've ever lived are alive right now, and they're these people. And they don't deserve to have any seat at this table. They deserve to be on the bench at a tribunal being tried for war crimes. That's what they deserve, for what they did to Crimea in the 8 years between 2014 and 2022.
Yeah, where 14,000 civilians, non-combatants died through this shelling of their own people to get them to submit and break their will.
They turned the water off.
They turned
the water off to Crimea. Yeah. They rounded up dissidents. They tortured them. They gouged out their eyes. They cut off their testicles. They did all these nasty things to these people. The worst kind of torture you could imagine they were doing to these people, all being funded by Igor Kolomoisky, who's in bed, who created Zelensky, literally, because he owned the television studio that employed Zelensky in a soap opera or a comedy opera that where Zelensky was a high school history teacher who decided to run for president of Ukraine and became president of Ukraine. He quit that job. He quit like that show because he actually got elected to be the president of Ukraine in real life. That's the reason that show stopped running.
Yeah. I mean, what a joke. Yeah, I saw a couple episodes of that. That's exactly how the show begins. It's literally a bunch of oligarchs having a bet to see if they could make one of their stooges, some random schlep, become the president of Ukraine. That's how it begins.
Has one media outlet in the West connected those dots? No,
I know. No. But on that note of what you just said, as far as the mints number 3, and this is before we go on to the next clip by Trump, but it's just, this is potent stuff to pull on. Keep in mind, there was a peace deal that was signed. They actually negotiated a peace deal in April of 2022, just a little over 2 months after the special military operation began. That peace deal involves a key Ukrainian negotiator who, upon returning back home to Kiev to actually start working out the details of what he negotiated, that was his mandate, Denis Kidiev, he immediately gets killed and is called a Russian stooge, or what do they call him? A Russian spy, because he was actually trying to get peace. So they kill their lead peace negotiator in April 2022. And that was, I think, right after, or maybe it was right before, I'm not too sure, that scenario where Boris Johnson all of a sudden shows up. And then you got this hilarious video where he gets out of his limousine to go and meet Zelensky. And the first thing he does before he shakes Zelensky's hand is he wipes his ass. He wipes his butt and then then shakes Zelensky's hand, which may have just been Boris being a slob. Maybe he is.
He's a huge slob. The guy, he's like that is the only word you can use to describe that guy, is a slob, total slob.
Yes. And people are like, oh, but I miss the days with Cameron, the former prime minister before him, and it's like, no,
David Cameron.
David Cameron, and it's like, well, that guy actually had sex with a dead pig in Ivy League college to get into one of your frats. That's what he had to do, and this guy
they're all slobs. Some of them are just better at presenting themselves on television than others. But yeah, speaking of Boris Johnson, before we go to your next clip, we'll just watch this clip real quick because this is relevant. This is Nigel Farage in 2010. So this is him speaking at the EU in February 2010. You can see it right here. So exactly 15 years ago.
You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask, is who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you? And what mechanism? Oh, I know democracy is not popular with you lot. And what mechanism do the peoples of Europe have to remove you? Is this European democracy? Well, I sense, though, that you're competent and capable and dangerous. And I have no doubt that it's your intention to be the quiet assassin of European democracy and of the European nation states. You appear to have a loathing for the very concept of the existence of nation states. Perhaps that's because you come from Belgium, which of course is pretty much a non-country. But since you took over, we've seen Greece reduced to nothing more than a protectorate. Sir, you have no legitimacy in this job at all, and I can say with confidence that I can speak on behalf of the majority of the British people in saying, we don't know you, we don't want you, and the sooner you're put out to grass, the better.
Yeah. So pretty much spoke. I mean, how relevant are those? And so the person he's addressing, for those who understand, he's addressing the president of the EU in that moment.
Yeah, Herman Van Rompuy.
Yeah, he's pointing out that the guy is not elected; he's an appointed bureaucrat, right? He's like, I don't even know who you are. Where did you come from? Why do you have all this power over the entire continent of Europe? All the things we're dealing with right now, all the things that Europe is dealing with right now, stems from the exact comments that he was pointing out 15 years ago, where he said that you are the quiet assassin of the European nation state. I sense that, you look like a slob. You look like an absolute slob, speaking of slobs, and you don't present yourself as a competent man, but I sense that you actually are very competent and you know exactly what you're doing. And what you're here to do is to destroy all of our countries. And that's exactly what we've seen happen over the past 15 years to Europe. So very relevant. It's worth noting, and then I'll pass it back to you, is that in 2016, the summer before Donald Trump was elected president, Nigel Farage led the Brexit movement, they held a vote, just like they held in Ukraine in 2014, to leave Ukraine and join Russia, those provinces in the east. The British voted in the summer of 2016 to leave the EU, and Britain was going to leave the EU. And once that vote passed, there was a big celebration. Nigel Farage went and campaigned for Donald Trump to become president. And basically it was like, here are the two populist nationalist leaders of the Anglo world sit side by side. And then he rode off into the sunset and retired and said, all right, I am now passing the mantle on. I've achieved my life goal, which was to do Brexit. I'm now passing the mantle to you, Boris Johnson, and I'm leaving. And then Boris Johnson stepped in and took over and basically reversed course and made sure Brexit didn't happen. And then now, as a result, this past summer, Nigel Farage has come out of retirement and he's like, I'm coming, but the prodigal son returns and I'm coming back to finish what I started, because you scumbags in London could not be trusted to see this through, because you are not working for the people, you're working for demons.
That, I think, sets up the stage for Trump's commentary on the problematic definition of democracy that is being suffered in Ukraine, and specifically the dismal support that Zelensky has, who has avoided any type of election for, I think there was supposed to be an election in May of last year that was just canceled. No election. And so, 1 minute from Trump right now.
We're hearing that Russia wants to force Ukraine to hold new elections in order to sign any kind of a peace deal. Is that something that the U.S. would ever support?
Well, we have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, or essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I mean, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating, and where a country has been blown to smithereens. You got most of the cities are laying on their sides. The buildings are collapsed. It looks like a massive demolition site. So many of the cities. I mean, they haven't done it in Kiev because I guess they don't want to shoot too many rockets in there. They've done it 20%, but they haven't done it 100%. If they wanted to do it 100%, it would probably happen very quickly. But you have cities that are absolutely decimated. And yeah, I would say that, when they want a seat at the table, you could say the people wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, like, it's been a long time since we've had an election. That's not a Russia thing. That's something coming from me and coming from many other countries also.
Your thoughts?
Man, a few things. I mean, we'll get to the election thing in a minute, but so before he mentioned the Golden Domes, I didn't address that either. The Golden Dome thing is really interesting because I don't know how many Golden Domes there are in Ukraine, but the one that's the most famous, of course, is the St. Michael's Cathedral in Kiev. It has like a bunch of golden domes on it. It has not been knocked over. He says it's been up for 1,000 years. It was built in the early 1100s, so it's about 900 years old. So I'm not sure what he's like. He's been saying the Golden Domes thing for at least a year or two. He's been talking about the Golden Domes. I don't know what he's referring to, but it feels like he's not referring to St. Michael's. And what he just noted there is he said, Putin doesn't want to attack Kiev, and I assume it's because he doesn't want to destroy the city, and he's right. So he kind of contradicts himself where he says one minute that these cities are on their side, the Golden Domes have fallen, but then he also says that the Golden Domes haven't been attacked. So it's hard for me to know what he's talking about. A lot of people have speculated he's talking about Jeffrey Epstein's Island because Jeffrey Epstein's Island had that temple with the Golden Dome on it. I don't know, but it's an interesting commentary. The 4% thing is hilarious because I don't know where he gets that number from. Cujo, call sign Cujo's in the chat saying that the reported polls are 52%, which there's no way that Zelensky has a 52% approval rating. That sounds like the CNN ran that poll. But it's great power projection from a narrative warfare standpoint to be able to just get up and say that. Like, it doesn't even matter if it's true or not. He's just conveying that Zelensky has no support in Ukraine, which is probably true. I mean, we've all seen the videos now of the men being grabbed off the sidewalk and dragged into vans to go serve on the front line. We've heard the reports of these conscripts jumping into vehicles and driving towards the Russian front line to surrender just to get out of Ukraine. Or men hiding in apartments or trying to sneak out of the country to get out of conscription. The conscription age being incrementally lowered. I think it started at 32 and then it's dropped down to 26 and 24. And now they're talking about putting it at 18, maybe even going to 16. It's like they just want to kill every man in Ukraine, like every able-bodied male in Ukraine. So it's but getting the election thing, that is really, really important because what Trump is saying is he's calling Zelensky illegitimate, which he is. He's an illegitimate president. He's an illegitimate leader. And it's not because, in my opinion, he hasn't held an election. It's because I don't think he was ever legitimate. I think he was, as I said before, created by Igor Kolomoisky, 100% just created him out of thin air, made him a popular figure using television as a comedy actor, and then basically plugged him in as president. It's interesting, though, because you would think that these people could just run a fake election and just why didn't they just run a fake election and say, oh yeah, he got 70% of the vote, Ukraine stands with Zelensky. Why couldn't, I don't understand why they couldn't do that. That's a question that needs to be adjudicated, but very interesting that Trump is now calling the sweetheart of the Western media and the Western intelligence world illegitimate.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. And I noticed that there is this tendency of, I was thinking about Justin Trudeau as well, who's of a similar sort of intellectual caliber as Zelensky and a similar sort of cardboard cutout who was a drama teacher. He didn't even make it to have a career in acting. I don't think he was ever that good. He could put on blackface and do a dance and, act like somebody trustworthy while he molested his students. But again, couldn't you get somebody a little bit more competent? Why that? Or, you just posted, I noticed on your Telegram feed, the announcement that Kamala Harris has just announced that she's going to sign up to the same Hollywood talent agency that Joe Biden has also signed up for.
CAA. Yeah. And if you haven't done the deep dive on them, that is talk about a cult, talk about satanic, talk about the thing that controls Hollywood.
Oh, yeah?
CAA, yeah. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on this, but fact check me on this. I think might be Ari Emanuel. I think that's Ari Emanuel's firm. May or may not be accurate about that. And that would be the brother of Rahm Emanuel and Zeke Emanuel.
Interesting. Yeah. Yep. See, so there's a certain degree of almost a sick joke quality about some of this kabuki theater that I think the oligarchs in their arrogance, they kind of get off on that. There's almost the idea that I don't think that they were being dishonest in the Zelensky, the Ukrainian show from 2018, or maybe it was a bit earlier, probably earlier, where they were just gambling over hey, can you make this regular random schlep become like a branded? Can you brand and package and promote some random person to become the president? And I think that there's an element of that within the inner corridors where there's a lot of boredom, a lot of arrogance, a lot of godlike identities that are drunk on their own awesomeness and the belief in their own, immutability as Zeusian Olympian gods that are ordained to manage the human herd. So I think they do some things like that. So it really, you when you see somebody who thinks and can act like a human with no teleprompter in unmanaged situations that are not controlled, you're like, it's a breath of fresh air that there's like when you actually see that there's a human being operational in play who's capable of using their own thoughts and voice and are not like just groomed actors. But I think too, the fact that like this is the embodiment of European democracy at this point. Ursula von der Leyen, she's not elected. The decisions that are made, most Europeans have no clue who is making the decisions that are affecting their lives. It's like Canadians too. I think all parliamentary systems of control are designed to have this ambiguity about where are decisions coming from. We have the houses for the commoners. That's literally what they call it. The houses for the commoners, the House of Commons.
Mm-hmm.
They give it that name as a way to talk down to people, to give them the illusion that their say has some play in determining their destiny. But in reality, it's the House of Lords, these hereditary, non-elected houses and the associated deep state structures of the City of London, the livery companies, right? These livery companies that manage the heirs of the Viking takeover, the Nordic takeover of the Northmen, or as they became known as the Normans, that were introduced to take over control and create a new oligarchy within the England managing class back in the 11th century. That's still like all of the dominant families, whether the Cavendishes or whomever, the Bulwers, the Littons. This is where the vast majority of them were all enshrined as powers that then oversaw and launched things like the Crusades, like these forever wars. And that's just like, for me, very interesting. And another thing that I thought very interesting too was that the Sir Richard the Lionheart, or King Richard Lionheart. I think
yes,
King, right? King.
Yeah, King Richard the Lionheart. Yep.
Yeah, he tweaked after the Third Crusade. He tweaked the Archangel Michael school and motif into a British like Grail myth, like a Grail warrior Christian knight motif that became the official symbol for Britain, for England, which was St. George. So, you have just like in the case of, it was totally retweaked, rebranded.
Is that the one where Michael is stabbing the demon and
Yeah. He's on a horse, usually on a horse, though not always.
Not always,
he's usually stabbing the dragon.
Yeah,
and
the dragon or the demon. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And that's the same motif that was already baked into the Archangel Michael. And that was the same idea. The fact that these are two sort of parallel imageries, that was part of what was done to create a new chivalric crusader knight class in the case of England. I know that. I don't know about the other one. But this is when England created in the 19th century, they created the Order of St. Michael and St. George, right, as a knighthood for the mercenaries that do the dirty work and take big risks, like Henry Kissinger in service of the Empire. When Kissinger was made a knight of the British Empire, he was made a knight of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. So was George Bush Sr. And all of those who take the big risks are granted that if they do it well. As far as
it's an interesting inversion, because Michael is the archangel in biblical lore, tasked with guarding the entry to the Garden of Eden with the flaming sword.
Yeah.
So he's the one who casts out, who escorts out Adam and Eve after Eve succumbs to the snake. So it's just an interesting inversion that you see there. But yeah, and then you talk about the House of Lords, House of Commons. That's kind of how the Senate and the House of Representatives was set up. Was the Senate was supposed to be the house for the elite, whereas the House of Representatives was, in theory, like more of like the House of Commons, where you had a quicker turnover and you had more of like the lower class citizen statesmen, whereas like the more career politician or the polished educated academic intellectual would serve in the the good old boys would serve in the Senate in these longer terms, these 6-year terms. So and now we see that playing out now, where the Senate has become the gatekeeper to the presidency, where the president gets elected theoretically, and he can't even assemble his team. He can't even put his personnel together unless these people go around DC and kiss the rings of the Senate and basically prostrate themselves before all of these people. And really what is happening is they're cutting deals. Traditionally they're cutting deals, and it's like, well, I'm not going to vote to confirm this, the Secretary of Defense. And the Secretary of Defense candidate goes to his office and says, look, if you do that, I will approve contracts to sell, the missiles that your constituents make. And, they'll make billions of dollars, and I'm sure they'll give you a kickback, and you'll end up getting your board seat once you retire from the Senate. And it's like, that's how politics is done in DC.
Yeah, absolutely. It's disgusting. On that note, did you want to perhaps discuss, I don't know how long you have today. I don't have a hard stop like I sometimes do.
I don't either.
Okay, cool. We could do a commercial break and let's go into maybe a little bit of
ad read.
Yeah, because you and I were discussing a little bit as well, maybe taking a jab or two at the Darbyite perversion of Christianity and some of the political expression of that. So we can maybe go there if you want.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. All right, so for number 2, we have MyPillow.
I'm excited to announce that we're having our first ever mega sale on overstock clearance and brand new products. For example, save over 50% on this season's flannel sheets. Queen size only $59.98. Kings only $69.98. They sell out fast every year, so order now. Save 20% on our brand new My Crosses. They're designed in the likeness of the one I've worn every day for over 20 years. They come in men's and women's, and they're made right here in the USA. Get our 2025 6-piece My Towel sets for only $29.98. Our initial quantities are extremely low, so get them now before they go. And our best-selling standard My Pillows, just $14.98. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our first ever mega sale. But wait, remember that $75 free shipping rule? Well, that ship is sailed, because right now, every order ships absolutely free.
All right. So, yeah, I don't know how you want to handle it, but I mean, definitely.
Before we go to Darby, there's a few quick bullet points I wanted to hit, and then we can move on. And then it looks like Trump just put out a tweet about, or a post about Zelensky, so we should probably read that.
Right here. Yeah.
I'll grab that.
I got it right here set up.
Okay, perfect. So the two things I would say is before we get out of geopolitics is going back to the Riad meetings. Lavrov seems very pleased with how they went. They're going to reestablish ties. I love how they're going to reestablish diplomacy, because I think they had ended diplomacy, like America and Russia had cut diplomatic ties, and so we're going to reestablish diplomatic ties, set up embassies, which I think Biden had shut down. Trump pointed out during that press conference that the election imperative, like saying that we have to have an election in Ukraine in order to resolve this, they tried to put that on the Russians, and Trump said, no, I am the one who said that, meaning like he's the one who's now accusing Ukraine of not engaging in democracy. And remember, the whole argument was that this is in defense of democracy, right? So that was great. The Middle East Riyadh meetings, I think the Iran nuclear deal 2.0 conversation is going to really be about allowing Saudi Arabia to build a nuclear power plant, which is something they've been talking about or saying they want for a few years now. MBS went on, the Crown Prince went on Brett Baer, I think a year ago, and said that. He said that why can't we have a nuclear power plant? Like, we want a nuclear power plant, but the powers that be won't let us have it. And then Iran has a nuclear power plant. We built it for them in 1975. The Russians have helped them maintain it. But I think that's how this will all go. I think this isn't going to be about nuclear weapons. This is really going to be about access to commercial nuclear power. And and then eventually other countries will get it as well, and that'll help the whole golden age usher in. And then the last point I wanted to make was kind of bringing it full circle back to your friend's comments before. This was something that General Quast and Burning Bright discussed, and the observation that General Quast made is that a lot of the analytics and the analysis and the discussion in geopolitics and just politics in general is always about the symptom. It's like people are always focused on the symptom, addressing the symptom, resolving the symptom. And, one thing we try to do on Badlands is we try to dig a little deeper and figure out more of the root cause of the symptom, like the underlying cause of the symptom, and not just address the surface layer. So like in the context of your friend's comments, your friend is worried about the war with Russia, right? But like, what is the underlying cause of the war with Russia? And once you start to pull back the layers, you understand, the underlying cause is the aggression by the West, the biolabs in Ukraine, all those reasons that he had to go in, that Putin had to go in and invade Ukraine, that has nothing to do with going into Poland or going into Western Europe or any of that stuff. It's just about
you're clearly a Russian propagandist. You're obviously hopeless, and no one should listen to you at this point. but they do the same thing too for China as well, right? Like, I mean, there's all of this discussion now about like how China is so imperial that they want to take over the free and independent Taiwan, and it's like, well, actually, if you take a step back, China wouldn't care if Taiwan wants to be a very super autonomous country and be left alone. They're already doing like over 60% of their trade with that. Taiwan exports 60% of their goods to mainland China. They're already in a gravitational like relationship that's super powerful. It's just that nobody's looking at the 170,000 US troops that have been placed in and around China's perimeter in the Pacific, in their backyard, running military exercise, sending Green Beret special forces to Taiwan to train and manage the Taiwanese military, and National Endowment for Democracy organizations that have poured tens of millions of dollars into separatist organizations that ran a coup d'etat against the democratically elected Taiwan government of the KMT back in 2014. They just ignore all of these very clearly observable facts just blazing in front of our face, because the propaganda, I guess, is just too sweet, because we need somebody to hate. And who better to hate than these squinty-eyed yellow people? You just can't trust these atheist commies. So it just fits into certain prejudices that have been baked in during like 60 years of Cold War propaganda. And it kind of just fits the hypnotic induction. And we just overlook all this other stuff. And the same thing, like what my friend was sort of struggling with, that you could see, like you just said, you could see that there's this NATO military expansion. It's been aggressive. It grew from 15 countries in 1997 all the way up to being 31 or now 32 countries that are part of NATO, each one then getting ballistic missile shields installed in many cases that their elected politicians are not even allowed, whether in Romania, to go into these NATO controlled military installations. They don't have the authority to get into their own, like these NATO installations on their own borders. And you're saying that Russia has no reason to be concerned and that they're just going into Ukraine because and demanding that Ukraine signs a neutrality agreement. They're just doing that because they want to take over Europe. It's like, who's the aggressor here?
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of aligns with the whole tariff conversation that Trump has been pushing. And, when Ash and I were covering his meeting with the Japanese prime minister, Japan has been a key ally of America since World War II, which is funny because they were like on the other side of World War II, right? But in the aftermath, like wrapping up World War II, part of these treaties that were signed was that Japan is not allowed to have a standing military, and so America, basically agreed to defend Japan in exchange for them not having a standing military, and that was like their punishment, basically, for World War II, because they basically conquered all of that hemisphere, right? And so. But if you go back to like the 80s, Trump was giving interviews like on Oprah and on David Letterman and on other platforms where he was at the top of his lungs screaming about Japan and the tariffs with Japan. He's like, Japan floods our markets with all these cheap electronics like VCRs and cars. But try building a car in America and sending it to Japan to sell. He's like, good luck. You'll never do it. He's like, you'll never do it because even if you get permission to do it and you're able to get it in the market, you will pay such a high tariff that in order to make your money back, no one's going to buy that car at that price point. So it's not economically viable to sell VCRs or cars or anything else in Japan because of the tariff structure. And he also extended that, by the way, on many occasions to Taiwan. Like more recently, he's talked about how Taiwan, it's like our entire chip manufacturing. Like he said, why did all of a sudden Taiwan of all places become the center of the world for chip manufacturing? He's like, we used to manufacture chips, back when they were more rudimentary here in America. And then all of a sudden our chip manufacturing sector was just completely exported to Taiwan. Why? And those, by the way, were executive orders and things that Trump negotiated during his first term. And those facilities in Arizona and Texas have been under construction and are supposed to go into production this year. Chip manufacturing.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the thing. And I think that the oligarchy, and I liked what Farage had stated about the nation state, and people have underestimated the importance of the battle of the sovereign nation state and what that means, because the oligarchy has had this as one of their top priorities for centuries now, is the elimination of the institution itself, which is a relatively recent innovation in human history. It wasn't something that most of humans have had access to for up until like really the 17th century. In the form that we know them as today, is like sovereign nation states that exist to defend the people that compose a certain culture, a certain outlook against evil, and to promote the general welfare. That really emerged out of the 7-year or the 30 years war that finally ended the Protestant versus Catholic bloodbath in Europe. And the idea was, okay, we're going to set up the Westphalian Treaty. It's going to be founded upon the idea of forgiveness of past transgressions as the second article. The first article was that all nations will begin to work for the benefit of the other, like a true Christian principle, that our self-interest will be redefined, not as around territorial acquisitions by a feudal, a prince electorate or some warlord class that reaped a lot of money over a lot of dead bodies that we're all getting. All of these different warring factions, if you look at where they were getting money, it was the same like Venetian, Swiss, Genoese bankers that were backing all sides. They didn't care. They just were, it was like that's the military industrial complex. And they were just keeping the tensions of religious wars forever in place. Protestants have a certain philosophy about the nature of what it means to be Christian and how to read the Bible. Catholics have a different view, but there's a lot of points in common. They're all reading the same Bible. They're all like loving the principle of what Christ's message was. So there's a lot to work with if you care about peace. So much to work with, and yet they're getting people to just like slaughter eye for an eye style forever. And it was only by this agreement to say, okay, we're gonna redefine our idea that, okay, we'll respect territorial integrity of nations around certain borders, and that each one will now work for the benefit of their neighbor. We're going to unleash our treasuries now that we're not spending money on war, but we're going to direct our treasuries increasingly towards building canals like the Canal de Midi and these other different public works in Germany that were all being done with France, with other nations that were all benefiting together. And the idea of protectionism, the idea of creating, like, using the state to say, okay, we're going to encourage nascent manufacturing to grow where there was none formerly. And so you got to provide certain encouragements with bounties, with tariffs that prevent for flooding of goods into a market. That all came around through a moral principle. It wasn't just some sort of a desire to make more money for a private class of blah, blah, blah. It's like money did happen, profits did happen, but it came through a universal moral principle embedded in the idea of loving your neighbor and acting accordingly and looking for mechanisms that will allow that to not just be some nice ideal on parchment, but really take hold. And the American Revolution, that was like a big fight, was the economic fight. After you got your American Revolution, good job. Now you're 13 colonies who are now a state, who are now 13 states. wonderful, but you're bankrupt. Your dollar's worth shit. You've taken out loans you can never repay. You have no manufacturing. In the 1780s, there was really not much. They were kept down by the British Empire by design. Every time the colonies had tried to have manufacturing of their own horseshoes or hats or whatever, the British Empire would flood the market to destroy the local manufacturing before it could like stand on its own 2 feet for over a century. They even passed laws that made it illegal at different times for the colonies to have manufacturing, just like they did in India. So it was like, okay, now you don't have these foreign saboteurs trying to destroy your ability to have a real economy, but now you got to figure it out. And they took the lessons of Colbertism from France, and they took these things and applied it in a more perfect form in what America was able to come out with that allowed them to quadruple the American people within 40 years. And not just quantitatively, they became a competitor as far as ironworks, all the core aspects of the economy that one would need, including also just the ability to produce all of the equipment that would go into the Erie Canal, the biggest infrastructure project up until that point in the 1820s. That requires so many new skills and so much productive power to be generated out of nothing. And they were able to really show the world how a true nation can encourage freedom, entrepreneurialism, at the same time as the whole nation gets better at the same time and competes with the British Empire. It's like, that's our heritage. And it was forgotten and made illegal to even entertain that under the 50 years of globalization and the worship of, nation states playing no role in protectionism or anything like that. And finally, there's a space now that's really being leaned into for reactivating that lost tradition. So it's really exciting that it's actually, and my friend was saying the same thing too. He's like, I'm not buying American products. And I'm like, oh, you're not? He's like, no, because I'm standing up for Canada's interest. I was like, well, okay. Do you ever go to Tim Hortons? And for those Americans who don't know, that's like Dunkin' Donuts in Canada. It's like, if you want to be a Canadian patriot, you got to go to Tim Hortons. It's everywhere. Every second street corner has one of these coffee stands with donuts. And that's owned by Americans. We sold that off. So you really can't avoid it. And at the end of the day, we should see this as a blessing, because we don't have to do retaliatory tariffs just to hurt America back because we're hurt. That's a bad philosophy for tariffs. But if we saw this the way it is, it's like, this is an opportunity for us to use a proper tariff policy that is geared around the intention of building up what we let go of, our factories, our manufacturing that we shut down under the 35 years of NAFTA. We lost 3 million jobs in productive jobs in those years. We could now think about getting it back and doing it better. Build Ennsbridge, build the East, the all of the different pipelines that were shut down by Justin Trudeau for defending nature against human civilization. We could get all of these back up and running within a context of doing business with Russia and with the USA, who want to build the Arctic together. Russia could be invited back to play a participatory role on the Arctic Council. They're discussing. Lavrov just gave a speech saying that that's what they want to do, and Trump seems to be very open to working once again on the Arctic, which Canada would benefit from immensely.
Of course.
So it's
Well, and before mentioning addressing the symptom and not the root cause. I mean, that's another example of Trump doing a narrative deployment, teasing about making Canada the 51st state, which I don't think is probably going to happen. But it certainly invites the inquiry to those with the intellectual capacity to look past the emotional initial response to it, the knee-jerk reactions. And what is Trump talking about when he says that Canada, we basically we subsidize Canada by giving them $200 billion a year? Burning Bright made a great point during their conversation on Sunday where he said, Trudeau kind of lost the negotiation at the very beginning in the art of the deal, because he admitted that he came out and said, if you do this, you're going to destroy our economy. And the minute he said that, he lost the negotiation, because he admitted that Canada is completely dependent on the United States. And without the United States, Canada would wither and die on the vine. And that's Trump's entire point. The entire point is that without the United States and the U.S. government, Canada would not be able to exist. And that should invite inquiry from Canadians and Americans to say, why is that? How did that get like that? There's no reason that it should be like that way. And then when you go back and you unravel the history there, which I'm sure you've done, is like, how did we get to this situation where we exported all of our jobs through NAFTA, where we don't manufacture our own stuff, where people can just come and go as they please, and flood our markets with cheap goods, and in doing so, they're exploiting slave labor in the third world countries around the globe. And those are the kind of discussions that should be happening out of this, not, you know, whether or not Canada should become the 51st state and whether or not Donald Trump is a mean orange man. You know, it's like that is the surface level symptom that you get distracted. That's the shiny object. It's like, don't get distracted by the shiny object. Go on the intellectual pursuit of truth, and that is the path you should take. You mentioned the steel industry. That's another thing that happened with the whole Japan prime minister visit, was almost selling U.S. steel to Nippon Steel. And Joe Biden, this is kind of like a devolution proof, in my opinion, to John Harold's theory, on January 5th, blocked that sale. That was a sale where both sides agreed to that. That would be U.S. steel being sold to Nippon Steel, which is based in Tokyo, and for $14.9 billion. And the reason we now know, because both sides agreed to it. And then Joe Biden came in and said, nope, we are not doing this. I'm blocking this deal. And then Trump was able to negotiate the Japanese actually investing in steel, in the steel industry, as opposed to owning it. And the reason we now know is because David Biretz, I think is his name, Biretz, the CEO of U.S. Steel, he was going to get a $72 million payday from that deal. That's the reason he negotiated it, was he was going to get a $72 million bonus from that sale. And that's why, and I'm sure the board members probably were too, that's why he was going to do the deal. U.S. Steel, by the way, and I know this from my professional architecture career, we did an airport job up in Trenton, New Jersey, and I did like a history presentation to their government to sell like our design. And and 1903, JP Morgan created a holding company. We've talked about how evil the concept of a holding company is. A holding company went around the country, bought up every single steel industry in the country, consolidated under one roof called U.S. Steel, and most of the steel industry at the time was in Trenton, New Jersey. And then he picked it up and he moved it to Pittsburgh, and then Pittsburgh became known as the Steel City. But it's worth noting that prior to that, the 19th century, most of the steel industry was cultivated in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, also down in Alabama, because that's where they have a huge iron deposit, and they have like iron works down there. And iron is used to make steel. And so that was done mostly by German immigrants. You had people coming over from Germany, immigrating, one of them being John Roebling. John Roebling is one of the great figures in the history of steel. And what he's most known for is he figured out how to braid steel wire together to make steel cabling. So you could have like a very thin cable, and then you could have like a cable that's like this big around, and then eventually you could have a cable big enough to run across the Atlantic Ocean, which is what he did. And so the communication, the communication telegram line that ran from London to the United States, it actually went to Trenton initially. So the first signal ever sent from Europe to America in like the transatlantic cable was sent and received in downtown Trenton. So Trenton was like a very important place. And then all of a sudden it just got gutted by these oligarchs, and then the steel industry was shipped off. But yeah, so Roebling came from Germany. He was in Pennsylvania initially, and then he cultivated this cabling system. All the cable that's in the Brooklyn Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, elevators, and all of the early buildings in New York City, that the whole reason New York City went from being 2-story and 3-story and 4-story townhomes to skyscrapers was because of Roebling. So that's just one example. But like I could run through many, many other examples of how steel, like these German immigrants came over. But instead of building their factories in Germany and then shipping their steel to the United States, they were incentivized to come to America and do it here on U.S. soil. And that's the whole point. That's the power of incentivization and tariffs and protecting your, protectionism in terms of your economy.
Yeah, absolutely. It really comes down to, and again, it's really intention, because you could do the two different mindsets could do the same action, but with different intentions. And if the intention isn't based on natural law, it could be also an instrument of destruction. Like, I was giving the example of Canada pushing like retaliatory tariffs right now. They're only trying to do it from the idea that, oh, you're hurting us, we're going to hurt you. And so there's like the idea, okay, we're going to start taxing US farmers for we're going to put a tariff on farm goods, on consumer goods, a lot of food that's going to be coming in to hurt your farmers. But it's like, well, wait a minute, you're doing that, which is going to also, if not hurt Canadian people who eat food a lot, probably even more than you're hurting Americans. So you're not actually trying to do it to encourage the growth of Canadian farming. Yeah, there might be some farms that will benefit in Canada, but overall, you're going to be destroying the means by which an already strained people are going to be able to feed their families. And so it's becoming lose-lose in that sense. But if you have an idea of okay, getting a real intention to build back, like I can't even use the word build back, right? Better. Christ, it's perfectly fine sentence. Why'd they take that away from us?
As long as it's not all capitalized. Yeah, it's perfectly fine.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, then it would be what a blessing that would be if you have a paradigm to get back to an anti-Malthusian society that sees life, ingenuity, innovation as sacred. And if that's the intention, it's great. You will use and apply protective tariffs in a totally different way. So it's really comes down to, everything in my mind is intention. Like the universe is organized. That's like the principle in my mind of like how we judge natural law is there's a will of the creator that shapes the laws as the lawgiver of the universe. And to the degree that our human-made laws are in conformity with that intention of like why the lawgiver made the laws the way they did, as far as something which produces purposefulness even before there was any evidence of human beings, we see that there's evidence of purposefulness shaping the fabric of physical space-time, the behavior of orbits of planets, of atoms, of the harmonics we see within life, and how life interfaces with suns, with cosmic radiation that transforms, through chlorophyll, other molecules that are just amazingly beyond anything the human artificial creations have been able to even approximate, like photovoltaic cells. It's nice. We can get a little bit of energy by creating, a sort of relationship with energy from the sun that gets some electrons moving, and we could apply it to keep our TVs or, our refrigerators on, and that's fine. But the efficiency is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of what a chlorophyll molecule does in a leaf. It's like, it's incredible what was already there, showcasing that there's an intention. And when human beings act according to that, we are good. We increase, we're more happy, we're more fruitful as we multiply, and all of these things are great. And when we're not, and we become more like selfish oriented, we're more arrogant, like these really lame wannabe Christians by name only, but not really through action. Like, we do the opposite. We create more discord. We destroy our powers of having a better life for our kids. All of these things, when we fall out of whack of natural law. So whether it's protectionism, the use of a national bank, the use of like military, which everybody should have, it's a great way to like organize your productive forces to get a job done. But are you doing it because you want to power project and subdue the weak to your hegemony? Or are you doing it because it's just responsible to have a defense in society, right? It's just the responsible things. You should have a defensive mechanism in place against evildoers, sure, but then don't make it something that it's not, So yeah, Well,
and final point, and then we will transition to Darby, because the reciprocal tariffs, that's actually a brilliant move by Trump, because our manufacturing sector has been gutted. That's been discussed ad nauseum. But the one thing that we do have in America still is we are a consumer-based society. So we buy stuff, and we rack up credit card debt to buy stuff, right? So we will buy things like in excess. We are an excess materialistic culture, and so that makes our market very appealing for people, for merchants around the world, retailers around the world. They want to send stuff to our markets. So Trump is using that as a form of power projection to say, if you want access to our markets to sell things to the American consumer, who is the best consumer in the world, who will buy the most stuff, then you have to work with me. And if you don't work with me, I'm going to put a tariff on it, and then you're going to be screwed, and you're going to lose in the marketplace, and your competitors are going to eat your lunch. Doesn't really work for Canada because they, y'all probably don't have the level of consumerism that we have. You also only make up, I think Burning Bright said on the show, 5% of our exports are to Canada, which can easily be made up with negotiations, trade deals with other countries. So you don't really have a leg to stand on with reciprocal tariffs. And that's what Trudeau and others need to understand, is that even like Trump is flexing that because he actually has the power projection to back it up in the American consumer. The same really can't be said for Canada when it comes to the U.S. Canada has everything to lose in this situation if they don't work with Trump, not the other way around. But I do think it's going to work out. It's just Trudeau and the people behind him need to realize that working with Trump is the way to win. Working against him is the way to lose.
Well, yeah, and on that note, before we get to the Darby thing, because it's just it's an important line of thought. I think Saudi Arabia is a great example of that, because Canada in many ways has a lot of similarities to Saudi Arabia in the sense that we have been prevented from standing on our own 2 feet and developing a full spectrum economy because we have a lot of land, a lot of resources, a lot of lumber. So we were told, and that's been the case since the 17th century, or actually maybe I'd say 18th century, is that we are the land of the hewers of wood and drawers of water. That's our economy because there's a lot of water and a lot of wood. Now, today, obviously, they added a few more resources. There's a lot of uranium, too. We're the 4th biggest uranium market. A lot of oil, natural gas, a lot of those things. But it's still just raw materials. It's still extraction. It's not transformation into something usable. It's still extract, sell to the markets, turn into money, and then do it again. But the actual and Saudi Arabia had that problem, too. They had a big fight in the 70s to industrialize. The pro-industrial faction was taken down. And instead they were told, no, you're going to make money, a lot of it, out of just staying single export based on oil. And that's all you're going to be allowed to do. And you won't even be allowed to have your own military. We're going to, have the U.S. military industrial complex go in and do that job for you. And that's all you were. So you're totally susceptible to market erratic behavior of the markets, which is totally shaped by speculators like George Soros, who could then, under the cover of just the market language, destroy an economy by currency speculation or speculating against the price of oil in a coordinated way. And if you control trillions of dollars, then your decisions can break a nation, can break a whole market. If you sell, or if you short sell a company, you could destroy that company. If you so your very will shapes the world, and that's where Soros is famous in 1994 for saying, it is a mark of hubris to think that, for human beings to think that they are God. But after doing this for a few years, I've gotten used to it, and I understand how this works now. So
yeah,
Canada too. We like Saudi Arabia has Saudi Vision 2030. They've got an intention for building a full spectrum economy. They are even looking at nuclear power, which is in motion. They've got the UAE also, which both have uranium reserves under their soil that China, that other, I think German companies are also helping them develop an indigenous processing so you could use and process that fuel and then use it for the benefit of your own people instead of exporting it. That's the right thing. That's what Canada could definitely learn a lot from Saudi Arabia's example in this case.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw this too. I posted about this, but like Trump's rhetoric about come on, well, yeah, but like Trump's rhetoric about the Riviera of the Middle East being in Gaza. Yeah, the problem is that this was already done in 2018 with MBS. And MBS already built this in Saudi Arabia, and that's his rhetoric, his branding, the official branding of this development in Saudi Arabia. So, yeah. Anyway, that's just another signal that what Trump was saying about Gaza was just a ploy to do something else. So, anyway, but
yeah. Did you want to maybe read that because he just put out the statement like an hour ago, right, on Zelensky. Should we?
Yeah, let's go ahead and read that.
Okay. Maybe we'll do the Darby thing another day. I don't know. We'll see.
All
All right, let's read it.
We can maybe touch on it.
Okay. All right. You want to read it?
Yeah, it says, think of it, a modestly successful comedian, Volodymyr Zelensky, talked to the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the U.S. and quote unquote Trump, will never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't sleepy Joe Biden demand equalization? And that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us. We have a big, beautiful ocean as separation. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he is good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections, Zelensky better move fast, or he is not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died. And so it continues.
Strong words.
Pull that back up, though. There are a few things there that are worth pointing out. Number one, he's spelling Zelensky, I think, using like the Ukrainian spelling, if I'm not mistaken, like the two Y's, like because Zelensky, I think, has been written more times than I can count with just one Y. Yeah. That's a little interesting that he's doing that. There's certain words that are in quotes, like Trump in all caps with quotes multiple times, referring to himself in like the third person, missing all caps. And then at the very end, when he says millions have unnecessarily died, maybe there's a chance that millions of people have actually died in this war if you go back to 2014, but I kind of tend to doubt that. Again, I just wonder if he's talking about something else, if he's talking about something more than just the past 2.5 years, even the past, 11 years. Is there something else that he's talking about? When he says war, is he referring to something different? It's interesting to think about, but when he says millions in all caps, it's like, what exactly is he referring to? I don't know.
What hypothesis comes to your mind?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would think of is the trafficking stuff that happens in Ukraine. I mean, we've heard about the soldiers who've come out, the Russian soldiers who've come out and said that they found these like organ trafficking, the organ trafficking factories where there's just like body parts like in pits and stuff. The human trafficking stuff. I think McGregor and others have come out and confirmed that this is all real, that stuff was very real, that was happening.
You had the underground birthing centers too, with all of the mats, right?
Yep. Underground birthing centers. Babies. You had there were organ trafficking rings that were busted in Turkey. It's worth noting that Zelensky, when he gave that like response to all this, like the response to not being invited to Saudi Arabia, he was giving that press conference from Ankara, which is the capital of Turkey. I think from the unipolar perspective, Turkey is supposed to be the one managing the Middle East on behalf of the European hegemony. And it's not. And that's because Saudi Arabia has stepped in and kind of subverted that role, like usurped that role, really. That's interesting. So it seems like the whole Black Sea seems like there's some really dark stuff happening around the Black Sea that involves Ukraine, that involves Turkey, that maybe involves Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, perhaps. There's definitely some weird stuff going on in Armenia and Azerbaijan. So there are some unresolved issues that we just don't have enough information to fully form. But when he says millions of people have died, I just don't know if he's referring only to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine over the past 3 years.
Mm-hmm. No, good point. I mean, it's the harshest I've seen him. As far as words go, public words, it's the harshest I've seen anything yet, as far as calling out Zelensky as a dictator, alluding to the fact that Zelensky is a thief, just completely running away with untold amounts of U.S. taxpayer money. It seems as though, as I was just watching, it was the Duran and another analyst whose name I'm forgetting, Alex Christopher was going through this a little bit, that there's evidence that Zelensky appears to be preparing to create an exit strategy feasibly for himself. And there was some evidence that was brought to bear pertaining to his visit to the UAE and his signing with, he basically signed a special UAE-Ukraine special economic partnership that involves facilitating digital products that could also include, there's a variety of things, but one of those things makes it much, much more easy to distribute his wealth or send his wealth to the UAE out of Ukraine, and a few other things too. So that's one thing. Maybe he's preparing to get on a life raft and to collect or to carry as much treasure with him as he jumps onto that life raft while he's still talking a somewhat big talk, but it's kind of not believable because he has nothing to bring to the table. He has only the hate of his own people. He has no tangible political support at this time. And it does seem to be that, I mean, if an election can be forced onto Ukraine, he's going to lose in 2 seconds. He knows it. So his time is really nigh. It doesn't look like he's going to be there for much longer. So we'll see. But I mean, on these points, how about a word or two? I noticed that you were pretty active yesterday, sharing certain insights into, and I know why you're doing this, because like as optimistic as things are with Trump's fight and a lot of the better actors around him who seem to have a very good sense of strategy and battle plan, at the same time that we could see that there is this deep psycho-spiritual Achilles heel, which is embedded within many people who are MAGA, both who don't have power and many who do actually have political power. And it has to do with this particular brand of Christian Zionism that really only emerged in the 19th century out of figures closely tied to British intelligence. And so I know you've nailed John Nelson Darby as one of these key figures. And so you've been really, you're pretty sharp, I found. So maybe you want to say a word or two about some of those insights again to remind people what to keep in mind when they're evaluating what it means to be an American Christian in the 21st century and what to look out for.
Absolutely. So let me share my screen real quick and just kind of give everyone a little bit of context. Share this tab. And we will go to this first. Okay, so Nancy Mace put up, I guess this was this yesterday, 2 days ago, 3 days ago. First, she put up this post. It was Bella Hadid, who I think is she's a model, I think. She put up a post on her Instagram. She's Palestinian, and she put up a post that showed her standing, holding this map, and it says Western Palestine, and it shows basically the entire region of modern day Israel and Palestine. And then Nancy Mace basically like screenshotted it on Instagram and then posted it to X and said, Bella Hadid is a disgusting human being. Okay. She then came back and like, if that had just been what she posted, I kind of would have just been like, whatever, like, okay, Nancy, fine. But she then decided to go back to the well. I think it was yesterday. Let me just find this post. It's, man, she posts a lot. Yeah, okay. So it would be, here it is. So she like quoted that same post and she says, Israel doesn't occupy the land, they own it. It's biblical warfare, plain and simple. And then, like the New York Post and other, and so that was the post that I responded to. I'm just like, I said to her, like come back to Jesus. Killing these people is not going to be really. That's the message, right? Because what she's implying here is that this is biblical warfare. Like we need to go kill people, take their land because the land doesn't belong to them; it belongs to Israel. And so, therefore, these people living there are just vermin. They're animals. That's the rhetoric that Netanyahu and his friends use. is that they're animals, they're subhuman animals, and that they need to be exterminated or they need to be driven out. And if they decide to stay, this is according to Bezalel Smotrich, if they decide to stay, they will live in our society as second-class citizens, and they will not have the same rights as Israelis. So that's the supremacist view, and she's backing that. And then, of course, news outlets ran with that. They posted, they wrote articles about that, New York Post being one of them, and then she responded to that, New York Post. So here's the New York Post. Nancy Mace rips disgusting human being Bella Hadid for showing Palestinian map that includes Israel. And then she responded to it by saying, "Good luck changing my mind," wherever that post went. But she quote posted that article and just said, "Good luck changing my mind," meaning like I'm stern in these convictions. So what I can do is I can just go to Google. It's very easy. And I can just say Palestinian map, 19th century, hit enter, and I get, just all these hits. It's very easy to find. And like I can go to this one, and this is from Science Photo. Okay, fine. There was one that, here it is. I think this is the one that I found. No, it was, let me try typing Bible. Somebody had posted this like on Reddit, and they've been like, this is interesting. This one. Map of Palestine in my grandfather's Bible there, and this guy's kind of like, this is weird. And so he's looking at this map, of Israel, and it's showing the 12 tribes of Israel, and he's like, but why in my grandfather's Bible does it say Palestine? He's like, isn't this Israel? And the answer is, of course, no, it's not Israel, it's Palestine. And so if you go look at a Bible that was printed before 1909, this is very often the Bible used to have maps included in it. They stopped putting the maps in there. But if you go find a Bible from the 19th century, from the 1800s, you will most likely find maps in there of the region. And all these maps say Palestine all over it, because that's what the land was called. And there's a reason that they took it out, and it all has to do with this guy named John Nelson Darby, who we can talk about. This guy right here, we've talked about him before on the show before. And I'll pass it over to you to kind of explain it further. But effectively, the TLDR is that he fell off a horse, hit his head, had a vision that that Christians needed to establish a Jewish state in the Holy Land, and then basically formed the Plymouth Brethren and came up with this whole idea of dispensationalism. And later, one of his, acolytes, Cyrus Schofield, created what was called the Schofield Reference Bible. And what they did is they took the Oxford printing press, which had been around for like 400 years, since like 1500s or 1600s, and they created a new Oxford printing press in America, which it did not exist in America, but they created an American branch in 1908, 1909, and they started printing exclusively. The whole reason they created this Oxford printing press in America was to print these new Bibles called the Schofield Reference Bible. And what that Bible did is it changed key passages in the Bible, where it reinterpreted the Greek. It went back to the original scripture, and which is written in Greek and Aramaic and other languages, and they changed the interpretation. They reinterpreted the words so that Israel, it can be discerned, it can be interpreted from scholars reading the new version, that Christians have a moral obligation, basically an order from God, to go to the Holy Land, clear it out, and establish a nation state there exclusively for the Jewish people. And that is part of like the Christian obligation in serving Christ and serving God. And that entire psyop became the real foundation for Zionism.
Yeah, it's amazing how these two sort of perversions of Judaism and of Christianity co-developed by the exact same very small little social engineering, or you could even say religious engineering cult, that was able to generate both in parallel for having and with common geopolitical effects, which is part of the objective, is to create these constructs or new narratives about how to relate to your Bible, your Torah, whatever, your Quran, in order to get certain effects that will be beneficial to those who are seeking to have total control over the minds, the morals, and the physical, bodies of the people of the world. But on what you just said, yeah, like it's weird because he himself founded the Exclusive Brethren, which is weird. He was in it from the beginning. As far as once the Plymouth Brethren were created, he was there. But he didn't create the Plymouth Brethren. What's interesting is that the guy who created it was this dude, Anthony Norris Groves. And Anthony Norris Groves was clearly, he was assigned by the British Empire in 1828 or to 1829 to go into the Ottoman Empire and establish these missionary schools that would focus on the elite families within the Ottoman Empire. And then he was assigned about a year later to go and do the same thing in India, which he did. And part of it was to look for talent, to recruit them from the Indian or Muslim world, and then send them to get a special kind of like Rhodes Scholar-esque type of, all expenses paid trip to England for a few years to get brainwashed, and then to be sent back to become a manager on behalf of the empire. So that was part of his assignment. I think there was other aspects of getting invites. That's him right there. Yeah. He would get access to the inner courts, a lot of big political players who I think he was also getting intel that would be useful back for the British Empire. He was operational in Baghdad big time. So he sets up this Plymouth Brethren as a way to sort of try to go back to the roots of the authentic apostolic Christianity, which is that's sort of one of the techniques that's slimy amongst a lot of the splintered Christian sects and subsects and subsects, because there's so many of them, is that they always say, oh, they have a legitimate grievance about the institutional brand of whatever Christianity, that they're rebelling against. In his case, it was Anglican. And then they go say, well, let's go back to the pure roots again. Let's be authentic. And there's a legitimacy that's attractive, but then that's when all of a sudden new rebranding, new revamping begins to happen. So early on in this, you have, like you said, John Nelson Darby, whose brother is the Lord Justice of Ireland. His godfather is Lord Horatio Nelson, that's where he got the name Nelson from. That's the high level, naval general or admiral from the British Empire who carried out the Battle of Trafalgar, a big British Empire hero. So you got this like establishment character. He joins Groves's new cult. And then he, like you said, he falls off a horse. He hits his head. He's got all of a sudden a completely new take through revelation of like what is actually being said in the Bible that nobody caught until him. Like he's that great. And it's really weird when you start scratching on it a little bit, because he's of the view, and he writes this thing called The Hopes of the Church of God in Connection with the Destiny of the Jews and the Nations as Revealed in Prophecy. So he writes this book, and in it, he basically outlines that we have to see the world in dispensations, so that God had a different sort of set of rules for humanity at these different moments, separated by certain Kabbalistic lengths of time. So God is like one character, and actually I wrote it down here. I've got here's a model of his plan for the human creation, and you have here his period of innocence. Oh, here it's written here too. So his phase one, he's got it in like 7 phases. And he's like, in phase 1 is called the phase of innocence and denotes life in the Garden of Eden prior to eating the apple. Then phase 2, he says that's the period of conscience and denoted the period from Adam to Noah. Phase 3 is government, he calls it, and that denotes the period from Noah to Abraham. And then phase 4 is called patriarchal rule, which denotes Abraham to Moses period. And then phase 5, he says that's the Mosaic law period, and that denotes the period between Moses to Jesus. And then phase 6 is called grace and indicates Jesus to the present time, so that 2,000-year period. And then the final phase of the 7, which everything is moving towards this final thing, which is going to be the 1,000-year rule, which is going to come right after the rapture, which will have then also, he goes into a lot of detail, right? Like it feels like the detail that I find when I look at like these idiot quantum physicists talking about like how they could like measure the picosecond after the Big Bang, at which like muons formed out of like neutrinos, and then like quarks formed out of like subquarks, and like they can like measure every single detail to like, and then he's like, but this 7-year period of absolute dominance by the Antichrist is gonna have to happen. But before that happens, if you're part of my school of Christians, but specifically my school, who believes exactly the particular interpretation I'm laying out because of my getting my head bonked on the rock, then you'll have a secret rapture, and you won't have to suffer the 7 years of hell on earth the way all of the other people, including who thought they were Christians, are going to suffer. But then, we'll have the 1,000-year rule, and then maybe some final battle. And there's this weird discombobulated graph that I found online of his dispensations as well, from the antediluvian flood area to the Omega point, which I think Piatael de Chaldin, the Jesuit priest, picked up on that Omega point, which was then rebranded in more recent years by Ray Kurzweil and a lot of the transhumanists for the singularity moment that they like postulate is this moment when machines/demons become self-thinking entities and eliminate humans. So there's different like spins on the same thing. Now, another thing that's interesting about this character, who then inspires like all of his works, they're all based on the idea that the end times is nigh. It's right now. And he calls it like 6 different times from like 1840 to 1880. He calls it like so many different times, saying, okay, now's the end time. And the detail that he really hammers at is Russia is the Antichrist, because that was Britain's primary nemesis behind the USA was Russia.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
And he's really obsessed with the Battle of Megiddo, which is like the zone in like Lebanon. It's like northern, just a little bit above Palestine. It's Megiddo. It's an area right near the Mount Carmel. He's obsessed with that, at which point all of the Jews, he's of the view, after we bring them all to the Holy Land, this can only happen if you physically get the Jews to go there and to create some kingdom, at which point we can create a seat for the Antichrist to come that will then sort of be like a spell or an invocation to bring in Jesus to do battle with the thing. And then, we're going to, most of those Jews are going to die. The ones that don't die will become Christian. So there's like this weird other quality. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of the heart of it. Like so the kind of the high level bullet points that really strike me that I have a big problem with. Number one, the Russian thing is, that it just aligns with so many other political schools of thought that line up with like the Malthusians and these unipolar hegemonic psychopaths who want to destroy the world. They all cast Russia as the bad guy, right? Which is interesting because when you look at Russia right now, Russia is absolutely the savior of the modern Christian church, in my opinion, because when you look at Western Christianity, it is a complete mess. Looking at the Vatican, looking at the clergy, looking at like the child trafficking accusations, looking at how all of these churches are embracing woke ideology, and you have churches, 5 churches that I can walk to in my area. So I live in an area that has lots and lots of churches, and many of them, not all of them, but many of them fly the rainbow flag. They preach wokeism from the altar. Like, I know people who stopped going to church because literally all of that stuff, like the transgender stuff, is being heavily shoved down your throat from the pulpit in church. And so it is like just so disgusting what is happening in Western and like across the West with Christianity. It has obviously been subverted and infiltrated by Satanists who are trying to invert it and destroy it from within. That is demonstrably true. It doesn't mean there aren't good people in it, but I'm just saying that they have been infiltrated, and you can just look at it and know that it's evil. It's become evil, or it at least is being orchestrated by bad people. So that you have that element of it. You have the element of what you just said about people need to die. Like, in order to achieve this vision that this guy has, people have to die. Jews have to die, Christians have to die, Muslims have to die, all kinds of people have to die, but it's all for the greater glory of God. It's God's will. It's what God demands. God demands a blood sacrifice, is effectively what they're saying, which is antithetical to the entire, like, the main points the main points of the New Testament and of the teachings of Jesus is that Jesus died on the cross so that nobody else has to do a sacrifice. You don't have to sacrifice humans. You don't have to sacrifice animals. All that's done. We don't do any more blood sacrifice because the only blood sacrifice that matters is the one that Jesus did. And he died for everyone. So there's no more sacrifice necessary. Stop the barbaric acts. And then if you go look at like the Wikipedia for dispensationalism, it says right here, dispensationalists use a literal interpretation of the Bible that believe that divine revelation unfolds throughout the Bible. They believe that there is a distinction between Israel and the church, meaning that Israel is something physically separate from the church meaning like Jesus, and that Christians are not bound by Mosaic law. And if you don't know what Mosaic law means, they mean the 10 Commandments, meaning that you are not required to comply with the 10 Commandments at all times because, you know, it's relative. It's relative. Like sometimes you have to murder people. Like sometimes God demands that you have to murder people. This is where you get into the subversive, satanic doctrine of moral relativism, and that, you know, it's not always bad when you cut somebody's throat if you're doing it for the greater glory of God. And that is where you get into like the wars of conquest, the Crusades. You know, we're going to go kill people for the glory of Jesus and for the glory of God. And then ultimately, the last point I'll make is that the thing that I think I find the most just nauseating is when there is like this worship, I think a better word for it, but a worship of the state of Israel, where they're like people who, and my inbox gets flooded with, like my DMs get flooded with, and if you've DM'd me like something nice and something positive and I haven't responded, it's only because I stopped checking that stuff, because it's just so many people coming in there to tell me how awful I am for criticizing the nation of Israel. And what they say is that basically Israel can do no wrong. Anything the government of Israel does is by definition the right thing and God's will. And because of that, you cannot question that government. Anything they're doing is God's will. There is no bad act that they can do. You are basically telling, like, what you're saying is that they are a divine entity. They are a God on earth. And that anything they do, just like God himself, anything God does is by definition pure and righteous because he is God. Anything the government of Israel does is pure and righteous because it is Israel. And that is just such a satanic inversion of what is called the Bible, where you're not supposed to worship anything on earth. You're not supposed to worship, like, idolize anything. It's called idolatry. Like, there's so many reasons. Like my skin is crawling right now just saying this stuff out loud. But this is the stuff that's in my inbox that people are saying to me because they're outraged that I dare step out and question the nation of Israel, like a government administered by human beings, by mortals. And they're saying that those mortals are incapable of doing the wrong thing because they happen to call themselves Israel. It's so sad. And it's so just shameful. And I really think that in the future, we're going to look back at all this and say, I can't believe that this happened. But you know, many such cases throughout history.
On that note, I couldn't agree more. I'm actually getting a lot of hate right now because I'm doing a series for Badlands that I felt compelled to do. And there's going to be like 7 or 8 installments, but I've published 4 so far on Real Patriots Don't Think Like Hitler. And I just recently published part 4. And and I'm getting a lot of supportive messages, but I'm also getting a surprising amount, and maybe I shouldn't be too surprised, of a lot of Hitler loving hate, like crazy over the top. And the more recent one that I'm going to just show here, or the second most recent one, is part 3, featuring like an SS baptism of a baby, which, you know, all of the baptisms were overhauled under Nazi Germany, and each baptism, if you're an SS officer, had to take place under the swastika with a picture of the Führer. And it was called a naming ceremony. It was de-Christianized of its Christian sort of motifs. Part of this, as far as what you said about the need to be liberated from any idea of Mosaic law, which is what attaches or connects Christianity and Judaism, that was really big under the new dispensation of the Reichsbible. So you had this progressive, they called it the progressive Christian movement, that rewrote the Bible in 1939, so that if you wanted to be a Christian within Nazi Germany, you were only allowed to utilize the Reich's Bible, which got rid of most of the Old Testament. It did keep elements of it, and it rewrote like all of the New Testament that made any reference to the idea that Christ or his disciples were Jewish. That was just rewritten. Mary all of a sudden was somebody who had sex with a Roman Teutonic soldier, so that, all of a sudden Christ and his apostles, and they become more like Aryan warriors. And the part of the Old Testament that they did keep involved elements of the Ten Commandments, except, and I just like copy pasted it into my article. They revamped the Ten Commandments. They got rid of "Thou shalt not kill." They just got rid of it, and they included now in the Reich's Bible, number 1, honor and believe in him wholeheartedly. Okay, fine. Number 2 is seek out the peace of God. Well, what does that mean? Number 3 is avoid all hypocrisy. Sure. Okay. Number 4 commandment, fourth commandment is holy is your health and life. My body is my temple, I guess. Holy is your well-being and honor. Holy is your truth and fidelity. Number 7 is honor your father and mother. Your children are your aid and your example. Number 8, this one gets me, is keep the blood pure and your marriage holy. Number 9 is maintain and multiply the heritage of your forefathers. Number 10 is be ready to help and forgive. Okay, that one's fine. Number 11 is honor your Führer, honor your Führer and master. And number 12 is joyously serve the people with work and sacrifice. That's just like some of the rebrandings, the revisionism that was done to sever the Old Testament from the New Testament and to create a more politically controllable variety of Christianity. But it was tied, I think, as well to this, because if you look at it, there was also Eichmann, who taught himself, but that's a painting that Hitler did of blonde Jesus in 1913. There was Eichmann taught himself Hebrew so that he could practice Kabbalah. And he was very, very adamant about the need to get the Jews of Europe into the desert to create a state. And that was the Havara Agreement coin, right, from 1933, which is what really got the ball rolling on mass immigration of the Jews from Europe into the zone we today call Palestine, featuring on the one side a Nazi swastika on one side of the coin, on the other side the Jewish Star of David that Eichmann approved of. And even on the Jewish Virtual Library site, they note that the Havara transfer was a major factor in making possible the immigration of approximately 60,000 German Jews to Palestine between 1933 and 39. But not just that, though, because on the one hand, it's like, did the Nazis care about the Jews having this great homeland to be in peace and not be bothered? It's like, no, it seemed like they were trying to create an eschatological conflict. And at the same time, you had Hitler meeting up with and having an alliance with Haj Amin al-Husseini, who is the British Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and a very close ally of the Muslim Brotherhood, who did his part to try to organize an Arab pro-Nazi alliance, which he did. And a lot of those Arabs who were duped into becoming pro-Nazis were sent into the cannon fodder fighting the Russians during World War II. But this guy was very deep up to the eyeballs in British Freemasonic intrigue with the Muslim Brotherhood, running paramilitary assassination groups, carrying out and overseeing murder squads that would go into Jewish villages to kill Jews. At the same time as you had, here, let me just remove this. At the same time as you had guys like this, Plymouth Brethren fanatic Ord Wingate, who Christopher Sykes from Sykes-Picot actually did this guy's biography. So this guy is so high up that he had a British, and Christopher Sykes was actually it's a fluff piece, but he's pointing out that Ord Wingate was the most fanatical organizer of the Irgun and the night squads that were working with Jabotinsky, and that's just one picture of the night squads that would do terror for terror operations. So it was basically they would do night raids into Arab villages, and they would torture and kill as many people as they could find, and that would sort of create the fires of hostility,
the animosity.
Yeah.
Which everyone has watched get restoked, because I think on October 6, 2023, Hamas allegedly had like 10% support, like they had like 10% support in Gaza. They had no public support. The public, that's why they had agreed to return government control to Fatah, to the Palestinian authorities, because they weren't providing government services. They were taking all the money that Mahmoud Abbas was giving them and basically putting it into their military operations. They weren't giving it to the people. And so people were just sick and tired of them. And then, of course, when Netanyahu started buying everyone's homes and destroying everyone's villages, he did Hamas the greatest favor he could possibly have done, because their ranks swelled with all these people who all of a sudden did not see a political solution with Netanyahu and thought the only way to deal with him was to fight him. And so then their support numbers ran up, and they're like at over 50% now in Gaza, because what else are you going to do? Your home's destroyed, your family's dead. What else are you going to do but pick up a gun and fight?
Yeah.
So it's like, that is the cycle of war and the cycle of death and the cycle of hate. That's what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly it. And that's the formula for success for these evil creeps. And I think that when I look at the cosmology, again, the Plymouth Brethren are all over this thing. And the cosmology, that very Kabbalistic, dispensationalist, premillennialist sort of framework that Darby advanced and that was applied, was also very similar to the type of dispensationalism that of the version or perversion of Christianity that Hitler, as a Gnostic sort of Christianity, also adhered to, where his idea of the 1,000-year period was the 1,000-year Reich. That was like, it wasn't just a political, but it was a spiritualized idea of creating this 1,000-year period of, I guess in Hitler's idea, he probably had some weird Nordic spin to it, because he did apparently see himself as an avatar of Odin, which is weird that there's this weird fusion between pagan Viking stuff mixed with a Gnostic Christian sort of fusion that's there. But the other thing is that Ord Wingate, he has no problem mass slaughtering innocent people to achieve what he believes is a holy end ordained by the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. Even though they're literalists, and that's the weird thing about these guys too, is that they call themselves fundamentalist literalists as far as how they read the Bible, but you read the book of Revelation and it's pure like imagery, allegory, like it's so open to interpretation.
It's some of the most cryptic. I mean, the Bible, like in general, even the parts that are very clear are somewhat cryptically written, because it's been, it's had to be translated and interpreted and all that. And you're talking about ancient Greek, ancient Aramaic. But then you get to the book of Revelation. It is the most cryptic language, like the rhetoric of any book in the Bible. It's very, very cryptic, and it's totally open to interpretation.
Exactly. So to be like a literalist makes no sense. Like even that, it's such a self-deceit. And so
it's like looking at a Salvador Dali painting and being like, "Oh, this is reality," right?
Exactly. This is exactly what's happening in this thing. Yeah. And the last guy here there's two other individuals who are Plymouth Brethren, very high level, exclusive brethren. Because again, the Darby sect was the exclusive brethren. That's like the ultra esoteric branch of the Plymouth Brethren. All of these guys I'm bringing up are exclusive brethren. I don't think any. So that you've got the exoteric and the esoteric teaching structure for the initiated and the uninitiated, as you always do for all of these groups. There's always two teachings. One for one for the plebes who are like not initiated. They're allowed to believe in moral values and the words that they read in the Bible from Jesus. But then you have those who are like, they know that Jesus is actually, Seth, Lucifer, is the avatar of the Sethian spirit, right? That got Eve to eat from the apple. And so then you've got that other weird thing. This guy is super interesting in my research, and he has very much influenced Graham Hancock, who people might know as somebody pushing the Ancient Aliens work. And Graham Hancock was a Rothschild asset in the 90s, working with the London Economist as the special agent in East Africa, and put forth his own Grail Ark of the Covenant myths that were funded by British Freemasonry, specifically Graham Hancock. So Graham Hancock was taking this guy, who is another follower of Darby. He actually was a friend of Darby. His name is George Pember. And he wrote a book in 1880 something called The Antichrist, Babylon, and the Coming of the Kingdom. Now, in the book, this guy is grand strategist. He's not like just a dude with thoughts. He's like in the inner club. Though I didn't even really know who he was until I started digging into this. But he writes here that it would seem that Babylon, talking about like where is this mystery Babylon? You know, it's all full of allegorical language. So what is it? He says that Babylon must be rebuilt and become again the center of the world and the glory of kingdoms, as we have it represented in the 18th chapter of the Apocalypse. The wonder is that the restoration of Babylon has never yet been attempted. As soon, however, as Christendom is united in the form of the 10 confederate kingdoms, all jealousy will be at an end, and the great prize may then be seized for the common good. For the common good, right? No doubt commerce will be the exciting motive. The civilized world perhaps combine to build a great central emporium, which by their united exertions will quickly surpass all other cities and finally become the capital of the Antichrist. And it's like these guys have a very strange idea of how to invoke the Antichrist, which this guy that you probably recognize, Aleister Crowley, was also a exclusive Plymouth Brethren member. His family was high-level exclusive Plymouth Brethren in the 1870s when he was born. And he rebelled against sort of the rigid, because it's a very rigid monastic sort of, you know, if you think about boobs, you're going to burn in hellfire forever. It's very, very constricting type of behavior. And it breaks kids. So it either gets them to become automatons or it breaks them and they become like rebellious Luciferians. In that case, that was Aleister Crowley. But Crowley said in his confessions that I accepted the theology of the Plymouth Brethren. In fact, I could hardly conceive of the existence of people who might doubt it. I simply went over to Satan's side. So he actually agreed with Darby. He was he continued to believe in Darby's interpretation of the cosmos. He just was like, I want to be on the side of the Antichrist. It's,
yeah,
you know,
I want to be on the winning side, as he saw it. Yeah. And so here, I'll just add a little more color into that. So you're talking about Germany, right? 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, 1933 is when Third Reich was founded. And of course, Prussia played a very, very important role in World War I and World War II. Prussia, prior to the 1880s, Germany was basically a collection of 300 kingdoms, and maybe I can find a map real quick. German kingdoms of the 1800s. Excuse me. See if I can find. Yeah, okay. Here, I'll share this real quick, just to give everyone a sense of what Germany looked like. This is what Germany looked like, and this is 1815 to 1866. So I think 1866 is when Germany was unified into a German state. But prior to that, you had 300 kingdoms of various sizes. Some of them were so small they don't even appear on this map, and some of them were as large as Prussia, which is the blue right here. This is Prussia. So you had, and basically under Prussian leadership, Otto von Bismarck consolidated the 300 kingdoms, because in the 19th century, you had a lot of nationalism sweeping over Europe. And so they consolidated the 300 kingdoms and created the German nation state. I guess that was 1866, but it was a sequence of wars. It was 3 big wars, one with Austria, one with Denmark, one with France, and all of them were very quick. They were very short wars, but 3 successive wars over a number of decades. And Otto von Bismarck created the German nation state. Right after that, you had what was called the Cardwell reforms. The Cardwell reforms was a series of reforms of the British Army undertaken by the Secretary of State of War, Edward Cardwell, between 1868, so 2 years after that, in 1874 with the support of Liberal Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone. And so basically what happened is the British military adopted all of the Prussian military standards into, or almost all of them, into their system, and basically modeled their entire military after the Prussian military. And there were a lot of reasons for this. They wanted to get rid of some of the ridiculous practices that were happening, such as the purchase of officers' commissions, where a nobleman's son could come in and just pay a bunch of money and then be appointed like a lieutenant and get command of men with no military experience. That was happening pretty often, and just for the sole sense of being able to say that he was an officer in the British military. And so they wanted to get rid of that and some other things. This is also the same time. So they say 1874. 1873 was when the War Office set up the what would later be called British intelligence. And, we've done a show before about how we thought that the East India Company kind of transformed into British intelligence at that year, because that was the same year that through an act of parliament, 1873, the East India Company was officially abolished. Right here it says the commission reported in 1862, but few of its lessons were immediately implemented. The main obstacle had been objections by the defunct East India Company and its directors, who wished to maintain their own military establishment. Because for 40 years or 30 years, 40 years, because 1833, Parliament stripped the East India Company of its commercial license. So they stopped buying and selling goods in 1833 and just engaged in regime change in India and basically raising private armies. When they were abolished in 1873, their army was twice the size of the British military. British military was 120,000 men. The East India Company was 240,000 men. So there's that. There's a very, very incestuous relationship between the German leadership and the British leadership, which goes back centuries, and the banking and all of that is connected. Mm-hmm. And then you go to this is just to address really quickly, and then we can kind of we'll do rants and wrap this up. To address the people who are attacking you for writing that article about Hitler, there are a lot of things about the Third Reich that just don't make sense. We've certainly been lied to about World War II. There's no denying that. And we certainly, there's been a lot of obfuscation when it comes to Germany and the Third Reich and many of the stories that are told about them. And so the truth needs to be fully adjudicated. But to your point, Israel, the modern state of Israel, who receives a lot of hate and criticism by the same people who worship Hitler, would not exist without the Third Reich and would not exist without Hitler.
That's a fact. Yes.
That is a fact.
And as I noted, that's the Jewish virtual library admits that that's true. They're not happy about that fact. You could see they're a little uncomfortable about that fact, but they have to admit that that's a fact. That's true.
Fact. That is a fact. Chris Paul and I have had that conversation so many times in private. Because he has been getting into history and studying history on his own, and he learned that from reading all of those source documents, and it blew his mind. He was like, "How could this be?" But it's the truth. And then, I've had discussions with other people who are big Hitler. They view Hitler in a different light because they think that we're lied to about what actually happened. And one thing that they can't reconcile when I bring it to their attention is the fact that socialism, which is what the German state was under the Third Reich, is a Jewish ideology. And that's not my assertion. That is the assertion of the man who invented modern socialism, Moses Hess. He was the mentor of Karl Marx. It says right here, he had disagreements with Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who were two of his students. Those are the two guys who wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848. In the 11 years prior to 1848, this guy published 7 books about socialism and communism. One of them was literally called Socialism and Communism in 1842. So this guy literally wrote the book on socialism. He taught Karl Marx everything he knew about communism and socialism. Was his mentor. And basically their general disagreement, as I understand it, is that Karl Marx wanted to stay in Europe. These guys lived in Germany. they wanted to stay in Europe and basically overthrow the patriarchy, overthrow the aristocracy, and have like a violent revolution. And because Karl Marx felt that he had a chip on his shoulder from the way he was treated as a child because he was Jewish. So he said, let's overthrow these people. Let's have a violent revolution and basically create Zion everywhere. And Moses Hess, and Karl Marx, by the way, was not religious. He was an atheist. He claimed to reject all of his Jewish upbringing. Moses Hess, conversely, was a rabbi. He was very, very like a devout practitioner, and he did not believe in violence. So he said, no. What we should do is we should gather up all the Jews of Europe and move to Palestine and set up basically just set up a society there and kind of become the example for the world. And we will do socialism in Palestine and prove to everyone that it's the best model for governance. And then our example will lead the world and they will copy us. And, we'll kind of become like the shiny city on the hill. Right. So in his books, though, he says that the origins of socialism, the origins of communism came from ancient Jewish communes of about 160 people, where you would have 160 people living together and they would practice communism. And it worked because it was on such a small scale, right? It says right here, Hess was an early proponent of socialism and a precursor to what would later be called Zionism. So when you look at the government of the Third Reich, and this is, again, the guys who say that Hitler and the Nazis had it all figured out, they can't reconcile this. It's a socialist government. It's pushing what, according to the founder of socialism, is a Jewish government. How could the Nazis, the Third Reich, be practicing a Jewish form of government? They can't reconcile those two things, and it's because we've been lied to about a lot of this stuff. But also, when you look at the form of government that was practiced in the Third Reich, the demand from the government was that every citizen sacrifice himself for the glory of the state, right? It was like everyone should be working on self-improvement, but the whole point of the self-improvement was to serve the state and advance the interests of the Third Reich, right? When you look at the modern state of Israel, that is exactly the rhetoric that the Netanyahu government, the Zionists in Israel, put out. They say that everyone in Israel exists to serve the state of Israel and must do everything in their power to preserve it, protect it, and no individual is above the collective. That's the idea in Germany. That's the idea in the 30s. That's the idea in the modern nation of Israel. And the proof of that is Yoav Gallant. Yoav Gallant said, he came out and admitted like 2 weeks ago that the Hannibal Directive, let me just pull that up right here. Hannibal Directive, this is from February 9th. Ex-Israeli army chief, this is the secretary, the defense minister under Netanyahu. He admitted 2 weeks ago that, less than 2 weeks ago, that on October 7th, an order was given to the Israeli government, to the Israeli military, to kill civilians and soldiers who were being taken capture by, who basically were standing near Hamas. So the Hamas was engaged in violence or whatever. They were running through this music festival, whatever, just fire missiles at them and kill everybody, because they said it's a national security imperative. If any of these people are taken hostage by Hamas, that will be used against us and we will be forced to negotiate with terrorists. Or even worse, if they're soldiers, they could divulge critical information that might threaten the national security of Israel. Therefore, kill them. They won't be tortured. They won't suffer. That was the justification. But the idea is kill the individual to preserve the state. That is the opposite of what we practice here in America, where we go back and we save anybody. Like, no one gets left behind. No one gets left on the battlefield. If they're taken hostage, we go after them. We take them. We save them. So those are the things that can't be reconciled by the people who I think are probably criticizing you. And again, I've had these debates with a lot of these people, and they get mad at me because I bring this stuff up, but it's just the proof. It's right there. And there were Jewish soldiers in the Third Reich. There were, I think, 100,000 Jews enlisted of the 11 million people in the Wehrmacht. So, or the Wehrmacht. So anyway, that it is what it is. That there are a lot of things that need to be adjudicated when it comes to World War II that we've been lied to about. You also have the fact that there was elite merger after World War II, where a lot of these high-ranking Nazi officials came over and formed NATO and formed the UN and formed the CIA and formed NASA. Again, things that get denied by people who think that they had everything figured out. Otto, what's his name? His last name escapes me. Strappert, or the bodyguard for Hitler, hired by Mossad to go hunt down and kill all the Nazi scientists. Who were
Otto Skorzeny.
Skorzeny, yeah. Otto Skorzeny, literally Hitler's favorite person. Hitler was like, he's my favorite bodyguard. He is the peak. He represents what every German should be. He was like the Aryan specimen that Hitler said everyone should be this guy. Literally went to go work for Mossad, and Mossad said, go kill all these people. And he went around and he killed every single Nazi scientist who was working with Israel's enemies, including the Egyptians, including the Arabs, including the Soviets. And he went around and murdered all those people. So, went and killed his own countrymen for Israel. None of this stuff can be reconciled by the people who say that you're wrong for writing those articles. This stuff all needs to be adjudicated. I don't have all the answers. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I do have a lot of questions, and those questions deserve the light of day.
Well said. Well said. All right, let's I think we've given people a lot to chew on. So without further ado, let's transition over and see if there's any comments or questions that we need to address before we round it out.
Yeah, looks like we got a few rants. Okay, so we got AH13, I agree about the country of Israel today being evil 100%. If they are not, then why is Israel the top manufacturer of HRT meds for the trans agenda? Okay, so my take on this is very simple. I think that collective blame is a form of identity politics. So when you fall into the trap of saying that everyone here is guilty, you're doing the same thing the people that the oligarchs in Israel are doing when they're saying everyone in Gaza is guilty, even the babies, they all have to die, which is what some of them say. So you gotta be cautious about just doing collective blame. Obviously, the government of Israel and the people of Israel, any government and any people are two separate things. So I think you have to separate those two things. I mean, just look at America. There is a problem, though, when you look at Israel specifically, because there's a culture there that I can't say for certain because I don't live in Israel, whether it's everyone or just a segment of it. But there is a culture there that believes in the supremacy of Israel and believes that basically Palestine and others need to either be destroyed or become more servile for the state of Israel. So that needs to be addressed. That needs to be adjudicated. But to say it's 100% evil where every single person who lives there, that's not true, because we know that there are Israelis who have defected from the Israeli government, who've come forward and exposed a lot of the evil. So, there are examples of that not being 100% the case. So I think anytime you engage in identity politics, you're already in a losing position. What we can say is that there is obviously a very, very evil cartel that controls the world. Many of them identify as being Jewish, but I don't think they worship the God that is described in the Pentateuch, which is the Torah. I think they worship something very different. And by the way, you can look at a lot of Gentiles and Muslims, Gentiles meaning Muslims and Christians, who would be a part of that cartel as well. So we've talked about that before.
Yeah, I'll just add a word. I totally agree with what you just said, and we've seen how a small perverse faction of Satanists that are a fraction of the overall population can have a disproportionate effect on the political, cultural, economic policies of America. Most Americans are really good people. They just want to have a good life. But you got this thing that got its tentacles in through the Skull and Bones, through various, Wall Street, Scottish Rite, Freemasonic institutions that are very satanic and that have been able to masquerade as Christians and control levers that have really done a lot of damage. And one group, for the sake of the Zionist eschatological Satanists, that were very, very few in numbers, that were allied with Jabotinsky and these Plymouth Brethren provocateurs, were the networks around this guy named Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, who I've talked about a lot.
Kook is bad news bears.
And there was one specific yeshiva that grew, but it was negligible in the 50s. It was negligible in the 60s, and then after 1967, 68, it became really, really big by the 70s. And a lot of the members who went through this yeshiva, this Merkaz Sharav Yeshiva, were the doctrinaires of Rabbi Kook. Now, Rabbi Kook, just like the Grand Mufti Haj Amin, was the British Empire's selected operative who was installed as the official voice of the Jewish people in British Mandate Palestine. And this guy was a deep Kabbalist, just like it appears Darby was also, as all of these like Gnostic creatures at their inner core are practical Kabbalists. And there's a quote by Kook from his Orot, where he's describing the end times. And he says here, his view of what the end times should be, that the enlightened followers of his school should help to bring about as far as the Messiah. He says, the truth concerning the land is revealed in Kabbalah. Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, militates for life in the land of Israel. Rationalistic approaches to Judaism place no special value on the land of Israel. So he's speaking to people like David Ben-Gurion and the labor Zionists who are trying to just come up with some form of economic arrangement of cooperation with their Arab neighbors, but they don't have like a religious obsession with the land. They're not blood and soil cultists. But he's like, no, that's why they're ignorant. He says in wars, he's got a spiritualized idea of what the purpose of wars. He says in wars, national characters crystallize. Israel, as the universal reflection of mankind, benefits thereby through wars. The heels of Messiah follow upon world conflagration. At the hour of the downfall of Western civilization, Israel is called upon to fulfill its divine mission by providing the spiritual basis for the new world order. This is 1935. Mm-hmm. So he's got the view, just like many Christian Zionists have taken on the similar view, unfortunately, that it's good to have this total cataclysmic mass death period to purge humanity from our past sins and reconstruct, like out of a phoenix, a new humankind modeled on principles that you can only find in Kabbalah, which you can't actually read because it's more of a philosophy and a way of thinking about certain sounds, about certain meditations, about certain numerological tricks that only initiates can learn by being guided by a higher priesthood. You can't learn it through logic. You can't learn it through reason. It's not words you could think about philosophically, except for very vague, very mystical things. So it's a really great way for them to groom mystical fanatics who will then, in spite of their own will, be instruments of the downfall of civilization that he thinks God wants for the Messiah to come. So it's not that different from Darby at the end of the day.
Yep. And this is, we talk about contradictions with the Third Reich and Israel. Here's another contradiction with Christian Zionism, is that Rabbinic Judaism, which is a widely practiced form of Judaism in Israel, when Netanyahu says the Torah, he's not referring to the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch is the written Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It's what most Christians think of when they hear the word Torah. They're thinking of the Old Testament. The oral Torah is considered the practices that were never written down until the 6th century AD, meaning like 400 or 500 years after Jesus died. And they were like, oh, well, we were practicing this stuff the entire time. The entire time we were practicing this stuff, we just never bothered to write it down because it was prohibited. But we went ahead and did this. And this is where you kind of get into the idea of like you aren't beholden to Mosaic law, maybe. But most importantly, in this book, which is known as the Talmud, they explicitly say that Jesus is the greatest heretic that ever lived, and because of that, he's being punished by God in hell, boiling in a pit of excrement. And it's like, how do you reconcile that as a Christian, that that is being preached in certain, in places in Israel. It's like, I just don't understand how you could use religion as the argument for why we have to blindly support a foreign government. That's where I really take like an issue with the whole religious argument. Cause I'm just like, well, if they think that, then that's their right. I mean, everyone has a right to their opinion, but why do I have an obligation, a religious obligation, a moral obligation to support them? That's where I get into the like a real conscience crisis, so to speak. And then to your point, here's another post, and these kind of anecdotes are everywhere when you go and you study the 1930s, Palestine 1930s. Bella Hadid is simply holding up a map of Palestine before the UN created Israel. When her father, Mohammed Hadid, was a young boy in the city of Safed, his family took in German and Polish Jewish refugees who escaped war in Europe. Their guests promptly locked them out of their home and booted them from their land. This is the story of Palestinians. Now tell me who is disgusting, Bella or Nancy Mace? And these kind of anecdotes are all over the place, where the people who are being imported into the 1930s Palestine by the Nazis are the people who, number one, the Nazis wanted expelled from Germany. They didn't want there because they were culturally not congruent with what the Nazis perceived to be their culture. But number two, they were coming from a place that we've talked about many, many times called the Pale of Settlement. And the Pale of Settlement was a very, very impoverished province in Eastern Europe. And you can see modern day Ukraine, Poland, the eastern edges of modern day Germany, Romania. So these are, and of course, Western Russia. So it's like, when these people came over, they were, number one, they're socialists. So everyone who went to Israel in the 1930s were socialists, whether they were left wing or right wing. The left wing people were Bolsheviks. They were straight up communists. And the right wing people identified personally, like Jabotinsky was one of them, identified as a national socialist. And Jacob Stern, who was another one who identified as a national socialist, actually said our natural ally is Mussolini and Hitler because they're national socialists too. And they actually wrote a letter to Mussolini in 1940 called the Jerusalem Agreement, where they said, we will give you the port of Haifa, and we will give you 50% of the resources in Palestine if you send us troops and help us conquer Palestine and create the nation of Israel. Mussolini rejected it, but he did say, I will take you in. If you want to send me some guys, I will train them in how to blow things up, how to rig car bombs, and how to assassinate people effectively. And they did that. And then the Italians in their report said, these guys who came from like Western Russia, who came from the Pale of Settlement, ultimately said, these guys are the most have the greatest talent for violence of any people we've ever met in our life. Like, these guys know how to do violence better than any. It is profound. It's prolific. And it's because they came from a very rough neighborhood where there was just absolutely nothing there because they were so impoverished because of the conditions, the sanctions they lived under. Anyway, I digress, but that's the culture that we're talking about when we talk about, like, there is something very insidious there that needs to be rectified. I don't know if it's our job as Americans or Westerners to do that. That sounds like it might be Israel's job to resolve, but we shouldn't be just blindly giving them a blank check and being like, do whatever you want. Like, whatever you want. Like, yeah, if you want to kill people, kill people. Like, it's for the glory of God. Let's do it. Doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely.
So I think that might be, see if there's any other rants. I don't think I see any other rants, but good rant. Thank you for, sorry, I'm just scanning the chat. I don't see any, but I'll check for a boost real quick if you want to.
Sure, yeah.
Tell everyone what you have going on.
Okay. That's yes. So what Gordon just said should be held in mind. I would say additionally, I recently published, I think a lot of the viewers know, some may not know, a trilogy of books that I've called The Revenge of the Mystery Cults. Volume 1 especially, and Volume 3 touch upon today's proceedings in a pretty thorough manner that I'd encourage people to check out, dealing with, of course, the esoteric occult underground that has infiltrated and masquerades as Muslim or as Christian or as Jewish, and that all collaborated to unleash such ritualistic mass purgings of humanity as we saw with the Crusades, where you had Knights Templar high priests working with the high priests of the assassin cult of the Ismaili Nizari assassins, which today are represented predominantly by the forces around Aga Khan IV, the head of the Ismaili International. He's sort of a very, very powerful international body, which are the heirs of the assassins and which have an unbroken continuity for 1,000 years, interfacing with this, Neo-Templar architecture, which Aleister Crowley also took part in organizing when he became the head of the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Order of the New Templars, or the Order of the Templars of the East, as it was called, with Theodore Royce, which also was behind the Thelemic doctrine of do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, which Crowley formulated in the form not only of the his management of the OTO, but also his Astrum Argentum, which had as one of its devotees J.C.R. Fuller, who was a major general of the British military, who came up with all sorts of tank warfare, blitzkrieg doctrines that he took from the Germans, the Prussians, and that are still taught in West Point. They're still taught in military academies to this day. Now, J.C.R. Fuller was Oswald Mosley's lieutenant. That was the liaison between Aleister Crowley and Hitler in the 1920s and 30s, who brought in the Thelemic doctrines into the Nazi high command, was Fuller. And if had Oswald Mosley, who ran the National Socialists of England, the British Union of Fascists, had he been successful at being the British Nazi prime minister, as he had promised that he was going to be with the Nazi king, Edward the Eighth, who was the guy teaching little Elizabeth the Hitler salute, then Fuller would have become a member of the cabinet. But all that to say, you've got this direct continuity with deep penetrations into those who have been managing radical Islamic fundamentalism, who are such figures like, al-Afghani, Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, who was the founder of Salafism, who was part of the British Empire's chaos operations to destabilize the Ottoman Empire, leading up to the eventual undoing of the Ottoman Empire. But he was doing this in the 1880s as he was founding Salafism, a very rigid, almost like a Plymouth Brethren version of Islam, super rigid, super shame-based. That type of structure, though he himself didn't even believe in Islam. He himself was an occultist. He was tied to Madame Blavatsky in the esoteric section of the Theosophists. So the fact that you have this dance of these very subtle but very powerful forces of the occult misshaping so much of our history, creating things like the Muslim Brotherhood, out of which Hamas was generated, that are generally shaped by people who are more than happy to kill their own uninitiated members who don't realize what the thing is about, whether they're from the order of the Druze, or whether they're from the order of the Ismailis, or whether they're from, there's a number of these Gnostic orders that or Hamas, if they join that, they most of the members are cannon fodder, just as we see also with many of the non-initiated followers of Rabbi Kook, who think that they're doing the righteous thing, and they don't realize, just like many of the Nazis were trained as the Ukrainian Nazis are trained in our modern times, to go and become cannon fodder, to kill and to die for the sake of some high priesthood, which doesn't see them as anything more than scraps to be fed to lions. So, all that to say,
so that kind of goes back to two things. One, the people who probably argue with you about Hitler. I think they are looking at, in history, the lens that they're looking at this through is they're looking at, it's like modern America, right? You look at modern America, depending on where you're looking and what you're looking at, you're either going to come across MAGA culture, which is more of like the traditional Americana kind of stuff, right? The traditions of America, the American spirit, and you're going to walk away with one perspective, or you're going to look at like the stuff that you're seeing from the woke left in Hollywood and all of that stuff, right? The more satanic stuff. And you're going to come away with a very different view of America. And you're going to think, wow, America is a gross, disgusting, like Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
Same thing, I think, could probably be applied to the Third Reich. You look at the Third Reich, you're going to see the German people. You're going to see this great culture historically of German culture. I talked about earlier how the Germans developed the U.S. steel industry, right? Or if you look at it through the occult and the more agnostic stuff like you're talking about, very different perspective. And I think it's like sometimes I think people only want to see one side and they don't want to see the other side. And depending on where you're coming at it from, you're not going to see the full picture. And it's the good twin, evil twin argument that I think Chris Paul always makes. And it also brings us full circle to what we said in the beginning, where this comes down to two types of people in this world: those who want war and death, and those who want peace and prosperity. And that, at the end of the day, defines it all. Because the people who want war and death, some of them are Jewish, some of them are identify as Jewish, some of them identify as Christian, some of them identify as Muslim. But ultimately, they serve, I think, a very different God than the one they claim to serve. So that's where I think I would wrap it up. And thanks for watching, everyone. This has been a very long episode. I'm sure I hope there's no consternation or heartburn over the 2 hour, 40-minute episode. But we've done a lot of short episodes, so this was a good one.
Yeah, it was good to get that out of our system. And this was a lot of fun. And for those who don't know, I'm going to be traveling with Cynthia in Europe doing some speaking tours. So unfortunately, I probably won't be able to make it for the next 2 episodes. So I'm sure you'll be able to blow people's minds in the ways you always do. And if you're able to get a guest, that's great. The other thing, if people want to get the books, the trilogy of the Revenge of the Mystery Cults, go to CanadianPatriot.org, or the link, I'll just put it in the comments section too, so people can get those. And give me your thoughts. I'm always curious. I love getting feedback on this stuff. And be aware that part 5 of The Real Patriots Don't Think Like Hitler is coming out soon. So keep your eyes peeled for that as well. So Gordon, awesome. It's always a pleasure, man. Really fun.
Yeah, man. Great show. And everyone tune in next week. I'll figure something out. We'll do something good. So hit the thumbs up on your way out, please, if you enjoy the show. And we will see you soon.
Ooh, do we have an outro video? We do, right?
Yes, but
I don't know how to play that.
Yeah, let me do it real quick.
Okay. I don't know what to do.
I got it.
Oh, this is anticlimactic. Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media. Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.